Chapter 2449, Exposed. Hongyi, what happened? Asked Hua Jiyu. Hongyi looked at Hua Jiyu and said, Master, previously, you secretly asked me about what Saint Xunchan's underlings were up to. Now, Saint Xunchan has issued an order to investigate all mansions and cities in 6 Desires Heavens. Moreover, a bounty is offered to anyone among the top forces of various regions who can identify the 2 fiends who instigated the fight between Lord 6 Desires and Lord Initial Zen. The whistleblower is required to reveal their images too. As she said this, Hongyi paused and looked at Hua Jiyu and Yi Futian. She then asked, Master, did the 2 of you really instigate the fight between the 2 lords a few months ago? Were you the ones who caused the death of the 2 lords when the 4 of them fought among themselves? The bounty offered by Saint Xunchan is surely an eye-watering amount. Why have you come to inform us to leave instead of reporting our whereabouts to him and claiming the bounty? Yi Futian asked. There was pain hidden in Hongyi's eyes when she looked at him. Then, she looked at Hua Jiyu and explained, Wouldn't I be betraying my sect if I expose the whereabouts of Master? I can't do that. Yi Futian continued, Since you believe the rumors about both of us instigating the fight among the 4 lords, have you considered this? What bargaining chip did we have that was great enough to incite them to war? Furthermore, the reason was tempting enough to cause the 2 of them to kill each other. Yi Futian's question caused Hongyi to be stunned. She was puzzled. She looked at him and asked, What was it? Yi Futian explained, I'm not a cultivator from your world. I'm from another world. I was detained in the Divine Mountain by Lord 6 Desires due to the treasures I possessed. After the other 3 lords learned about what happened, they were blinded by greed as well. They went to Lord 6 Desires and demanded he give them the treasures. This was the cause of the fight. I have indeed instigated the fight among the 4 lords. However, if I did not do so, I would have been at their mercy. I would not have survived. His words shocked Hongyi. Yi Futian glanced at Hua Jiyu and noticed that she remained calm. So that's why. In that case, their greed for treasure resulted in the war. Then, for Saint Xunchan to spare no expense to search and offer a bounty for finding you means, mumbled Hongyi as she suddenly understood. She looked at Hua Jiyu and Yi Futian and said, Master, now the people in the city have seen both of your portraits. There is no way for you to leave. What should we do? That won't be a problem, said Yi Futian. Go and tell them that the 2 of us are here. Hongyi was stunned. She looked at Yi Futian and then at Hua Jiyu. She did not comprehend. Go, instructed Hua Jiyu. Master, replied Hongyi as she stared at her. Hua Jiyu explained to Hongyi, if we do not sever the ties between us, we will only get you involved. Hongyi, do not mention to others that you are my disciple. Aside from you, your father has also seen us, so we will certainly be exposed. However, he will not betray you. Go and inform them of our location. You might be able to claim the bounty. This is the last thing I can do for you as your master. Her voice was also exceptionally calm. No, I will go find my father. If he knows that you have taken me as your disciple, he will not sell you out, master, said Hongyi. Yi Futian and Hua Jiyu gazed at her. She was still too young. Before personal gain as well as life or death, what did ties like this amount to? They barely knew each other. Why would her father risk his life for them? Hongyi, Yi Futian continued, don't worry. Even if you reveal our location, we can still escape. The people of the city cannot keep us here. Otherwise, how did we escape from the war of the 6 Desires Heavenly Palace? Since things are bound to happen, there is no need to prevent them from occurring. Asking you to do this is to protect you. You don't wish to make us feel guilty, right? Hongyi glanced back at Hua Jiyu. Hua Jiyu nodded and said, Go. We will be fine. Seeing that Hongyi was still hesitating, Hua Jiyu sternly ordered, As your master, I command you to go. Hongyi's eyes were slightly red. She then nodded her head and replied, Yes, master. As she said this, she turned and left. After Hongyi left, the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor appeared. As he looked at it, Yi Futian mumbled, I wonder when I can fight without needing to rely on this. The opponents that you encountered are all cultivators who have experienced the divine tribulation of the Great Path. When you reach the peak of the Renhuang Plain, you might be able to forego relying on the divine body, said Hua Jiyu. She only said that it was a possibility. Even if he did so, the opponents Yi Futian faced were still top figures who survived the second stage of the divine tribulation. Not long after, Yi Futian sensed that many powerful auras were approaching them from all directions. Right then, the formless wave had already disappeared. He no longer hid their auras. Wills swept over and scanned over their figures rudely. In the sky, the silhouettes of many cultivators continued to appear. Many of them were top-tier Renhuangs. After getting news of their location, they rushed over immediately. Saint Shunchan's reward was too irresistible. No one could remain unfazed by it. However, many people did not know of Yi Futian's ability. The exact details of the War of the Six Desires Heavenly Palace had been sealed away. Only some details, just like what Hongyi knew, were common knowledge. There were not many who were aware of the whole story of the incident. Hongyi was also among the crowd in the distance. She stood behind her father and looked towards Yi Futian and Hua Jiyu. She felt a pang of guilt, and her eyes were red. She had not managed to expose them. The one who had done so was her father, just like Yi Futian had predicted. Yi Futian and Hua Jiyu did not look at Hongyi. Yi Futian declared, "Anyone who stands in our way will be killed without any mercy." As he said this, the crowd saw a divine body float up into the sky. Hua Jiyu was beside the divine body. A terrifying aura emanated from it, and the great path rumbled. This caused the hearts of the surrounding cultivators to tremble. "Let's go," Yi Futian said. Then, both of them stepped up into the sky and left the place. When the cultivators saw them leaving, they were all actually somewhat hesitant. They didn't dare attack them right away. "Hold them off. We only need to wait until the Lord's underlings arrive," a deep and powerful voice sounded. A cultivator who was at the peak of the Renhuang Plain took a step forward and charged up into the air. Many ancient golden clocks plummeted from the sky, attempting to seal off the space and block Yi Futian and Hua Jiyu from leaving. Yi Futian raised his head and glanced at the clocks. Dong! Dong! The sound of clocks ringing could be heard continuously. Divine light burst forth as all the clocks were shattered into pieces. With a flash, the body of Shenjia the Great Emperor transformed into a beam of golden light and pierced the sky. Dong! The facial expression of the cultivator who was at the peak of the Renhuang Plain turned ugly. An enormous ancient clock appeared to protect him. However, the divine light directly penetrated the clock. The ancient clock crumbled, and the cultivator shook violently. Then, he turned into countless specks of light of the great path and dissipated. He had perished. Those who saw this scene all felt their hearts tremble. Yi Futian and Hua Jiyu immediately traversed through the sky and left. For a moment, no one actually dared to get in their way. Chapter 2450, Ambush. In the clouds, two silhouettes traversed through space quickly. They were moving as fast as lightning. Even though Saint Shunchan ordered various cultivators to hunt down Yi Futian, very few could actually stand against him. In the entire Six Desires heavens, Lord Six Desires used to be the only one who could confidently defeat Yi Futian. Lord Yi was a cultivator from Yemor Heaven, while Lord Liberty was a cultivator from Liberty Heaven. How many people among the cultivators beneath Saint Shunchan could be a match for Yi Futian? It was most likely very difficult to catch Yi Futian unless Saint Shunchan, his younger brother Lord Initial Zen, or someone at the same level as them personally pursued Yi Futian. Yi Futian's own ability was enough for him to kill the Renhuang before this. However, with the help of the flesh of Shenjia the Great Emperor, his speed was even faster. Yi Futian and Hua Jiyu traveled in space, and they had reached another city in the blink of an eye. Right at this moment, a dazzling divine light suddenly shone down. Even the clouds were illuminated as the divine light poured down from the sky above. The scene appeared exceptionally divine. It was as though they had arrived in paradise. At the same time, a mighty aura pressed down and loomed over the vast space. Yi Futian and Hua Jiyu stopped in their tracks. They raised their heads to look at the sky above. The space around them had been transformed into a sealed-off domain. Silhouettes of Buddhas appeared among the golden clouds, enshrouding the sun. Yi Futian was well aware that they were no longer in the main space. Instead, they were currently in the domain of the great path of a top-tier cultivator. They had been intercepted. The sound of Buddha reverberated within the space. Its sound was thunderous. The light of Buddha pierced through the golden clouds. Many faces of Buddhas could be seen in the sky. However, Yi Futian could not detect any cultivators. Buddhist runes and an enormous symbol of Wan appeared. The symbol grew larger and larger, covering the entire sky. Then, the symbol plummeted, charging towards where Yi Futian and Hua Jiyu were. The symbol of Wan that blocked out the sun in the sky shone with the light of Buddha. It was as though a heavenly might was charging down to crush all of existence. Yi Futian raised his head and looked at the gigantic symbol that was descending upon him. The divine body raised its hand and pointed at the sky. Immediately, endless sword runes landed on the symbol of Wan, followed by a dull thud reverberating in the space. A terrifying storm swept across the sky. Cracks appeared on the symbol of Wan. It then shattered. It was destroyed with the point of a finger. However, the next moment, the various Buddhas in the sky chanted the sound of Buddha simultaneously. The sound of Buddha circled Yi Futian. It was a Buddhist sound wave attack. The sound formed waves as they swept down and crashed directly into the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor. They caused Yi Futian's spiritual soul to tremble. This was the same sound wave attack technique that Lord Initial Zen had used back then. They were clearly from the same sect. These cultivators who were trying to kill him were Saint Zhenchan's men. They were most likely from Zhenchan Temple and were his direct disciples. However, from the strength of this attack, Yi Futian knew that they were not existences who had experienced the second stage of the divine tribulation of the Great Path. The strongest among them had only survived the first stage. Otherwise, there was no need for them to act this way. It would have been sufficient for them to walk out and attack him directly. If Yi Futian wanted to break through this attack, he had to forcefully shatter this domain. Around the figure of Xinjia the Great Emperor, a space filled with runes appeared. Each rune seemed to contain the power of path obliteration. This was the way of Xinjia the Great Emperor. The runes flowed within the space and coalesced into many sword runes. Menacing sword will emanated from them, causing many runic divine swords to appear in the space. The emanating sword light had an astonishing pressure. The space gave off a bone-chilling aura. Yi Futian's mind shifted, and immediately, the will of the space of runes burst forth and became beams of light. It ignored the rupturing of space and attacked the domain directly. It was as though countless beams of light immediately traversed the space and shot directly towards the various silhouettes of Buddhas. Bang! 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 Terrifying sounds could be heard. The various silhouettes of Buddhas in the sky shattered frenziedly. The domain also shattered. The light of Buddha remained, and the figures behind the domain were revealed. In the vast region around Yi Futian, many silhouettes appeared. They all had powerful auras, and there were even a few frightening existences who had experienced the first stage of the divine tribulation of the Great Path among them. Saint Zhenchan's position in the Western world was very high. He could be considered one of the giant-level figures who stood at the very top of the realm. There were not many people who were his equals. He had many subordinates in Zhenchan Temple. They were one of the most powerful forces in the Western world. Their power rivaled that of the ancient god clan of the Divine Prefecture. Saint Zhenchan himself was also a disciple of Buddhism and was considered orthodox in the Western world. That was why he had such a terrifying influence that could send cultivators to kill Yi Futian. The lineup he sent was extremely frightening. The various cultivators spread themselves out as they stared at Yi Futian. A suppressive aura enveloped the region. All of them were unleashing menacing auras. From the previous attack, they briefly experienced how terrifying was the power Yi Futian could release by relying on the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor. It was sufficient to kill an existence who survived the first stage of the divine tribulation of the Great Path. No wonder Great Elder Mortian had been killed by Yi Futian. The four lords had also fallen to his schemes, two of them perishing and another two severely injured. Hence, even though their lineup now was extremely powerful, the cultivators from Zhenchan Temple were still very cautious. They did not dare underestimate Yi Futian at the slightest. Yi Futian had single-handedly destroyed the Six Desires Heavenly Palace. How could they take such an existence lightly? If you follow us to Zhenchan Temple, you might have a chance of survival. If you cooperate, Saint Zhenchan might forgive you, someone among the cultivators said. This person was grabbed in golden robes like battle armor. A beam of golden light actually emanated from his glabella as though it was an eye. It seemed as though it would open at any given moment. It gave off an eerie feeling. Yi Futian laughed coldly inside. He had experienced all this before. The cultivators of the world were mostly the same. Be it in the Western world or the divine prefecture, a man's wealth was his own ruin by causing the greed of others. Yi Futian possessed the divine body of Shunjia the Great Emperor and the teachings of the Great Emperors. It was difficult for others not to covet what he had. Hence, he naturally did not trust anyone. Moreover, he had killed the junior of Saint Zhenchan, Lord Initial Zen. Even if Saint Zhenchan did not kill him, Yi Futian would still be imprisoned for life and be forced to surrender all he had. Why would he choose this path to his doom? Yi Futian did not respond to the other party. The space of runes appeared, and countless runes shone. An astonishing intent of battle radiated out from the divine body of Shunjia the Great Emperor. You do not know what is good for yourself, the person who had spoken to Yi Futian said in a cold tone. As he said this, as expected, the golden mark on his glabella lit up. It was as though a heavenly eye had opened. Immediately, a beam of menacing light shot straight out and landed on the figure of Shunjia the Great Emperor that Yi Futian was controlling. As this light shone on it, the divine body of Shunjia the Great Emperor seemed to be sealed by some power. The light formed its own domain. Chapter 2451, No Bars Hold. No matter how Shunjia the Great Emperor moved his body, he was always wrapped up within the divine light. At the same time, an extremely dangerous aura descended, and Yi Futian's spiritual soul could clearly feel the threat. Pest! A sharp sound was heard, and a beam of light that could tear through everything now shot out from the heavenly eye. It was invincible, containing the most terrifying space-tearing power. It directly slammed towards the divine body. Boom! In an instant, the attack descended on the body of Shunjia the Great Emperor, causing the divine body to tremble. It even took a step or two backward. Go for it, someone called out as an overbearing power of the Great Path shrouded the area where Yi Futian and Hua Jiyu were. However, right at this moment, a violent roar was heard. It seemed to come from the divine body itself. The body of Shunjia the Great Emperor not only stopped moving backward but lurched forward abruptly, carrying the space-tearing light beam forcefully forward, rushing to those cultivators who were in the void. Open! The divine eye at the man's brow chakra opened wide. A divine light of destruction shot out from it suddenly as if it meant to tear this space apart. Appalling golden traces appeared in the void, moving madly towards Yi Futian. Shunjia the Great Emperor did not retreat, however. His entire body was surrounded by the divine light, which served to protect the divine body. At the same time, his finger followed the beam of light to point upward. Another space-tearing divine light bloomed, turning into a sword. The sword collided with the divine light that came down for the kill, immediately destroying the beam of light. Careful, the other cultivators cautioned when they saw that the body of Shunjia the Great Emperor was moving into the sky along the beam of light. After all, Yi Futian was able to kill Great Elder Mortian with a single sword strike before. And there was no doubt whatsoever regarding the Great Elder's combat effectiveness. Bang! However, that cultivator with the heavenly eye seemed to be without fear, even itching to collide with the divine body of Shunjia the Great Emperor. He stepped down. Behind him came a massive and boundless divine shadow. It appeared above the sky. From above the infinite void, a divine light projected down, splitting the sky apart. When that heavenly eye of his was looking down, a devastating storm appeared from the firmament and blew down below. Yi Futian, however, was walking through this storm. A golden divine halberd appeared in the hands of the cultivator with the heavenly eye, puffing out unparalleled divine brilliance. Buzz! His figure flashed, and the gigantic divine shadow behind him was also moving with him. In this domain of the heavenly eye, it was as if his power of the great path could erupt to reach its maximum potential. This was his domain world, and he was its master. In this realm of the heavenly eye, he was the king. According to legend, the body of Shunjia the Great Emperor was unparalleled and was one of the most powerful existences in ancient times. Now, while it was controlled by a youngster, it had managed to slay the great elder of Mortian. He wanted to see for himself just how strong the body might be. Two rays of light rushed towards each other. Even though they were far apart, at this moment, the distance seemed to be non-existent. There were no human shapes that could be detected, only the light was visible. In an instant, the two figures collided. The divine halberd pierced the finger of Shunjia the Great Emperor, and this finger was the sharpest sword in the world right now. The divine light of destruction swept across the space, setting off a terrifying storm around it. It radiated into the boundless space, even to the extremely remote land. Countless cultivators looked up into the sky at this moment, but almost instantly, they began to flee frantically. The aftermath of the storm swept towards them, destroying any existence within its reach. In the area of collision, the divine light seemed to explode. The two figures separated, and Futian was knocked backward, but the other muffled a groan. A trace of golden blood seemed to seep out from the eye that appeared in the brow chakra, and his face was a bit distorted. That cultivator endured severe pain and made a hissing noise to express his pain. Before Futian was able to stop himself, a massive figure of Ahat suddenly appeared above him. It turned into a domain of the great path and covered him. This Ahat was in a reclining position, appearing as a sleeping Ahat. With the sound of Buddha, Futian, who was within the body of Shunjia the Great Emperor, felt drowsy all of a sudden. It seemed as if he was about to fall into a dream. Hua Jiyu, who was guarding behind him, also felt the onset of sudden drowsiness. Her mind was groggy, filled with only the shadows of the sleeping Ahat. It seemed as if there was nothing else to do except follow suit and fall into a deep sleep. Futian's guard heightened. In Buddhism, the sleeping Ahat was not an offensive ability for attacking purposes, but that didn't mean it wasn't dangerous. It could lead its targets to fall into a deep sleep, from which they could not awake on their own. Once the targets entered slumber, they were under the other's control completely, with no hope of ever awakening on their own. Right at this moment, sounds of rhythm were heard. A guqin appeared in the void, and upon the guqin, a series of musical notes bounced out, permeating between heaven and earth. Suddenly there was a strong sense of sadness that instantly expelled the sleepiness. Even the cultivators in the void felt that powerful sadness. Boom! A horrific sound came out while the body of Shunjia the Great Emperor faced forward. Under the rhythm of the divine requiem, infinite runes erupted from the divine body, enveloped the boundless space. Soon after, a number of divine monuments appeared above the sky. It was as if they were made from the runes. They fell down continuously. Even more frightening was that a door now appeared above the firmament, coming from the outer sky. It was like an ancient divine door that was capable of suppressing everything in the world. Clearly, Futian's control over the divine body of Shunjia the Great Emperor was becoming stronger. Every time he fought with the power of the divine body, it inevitably took a heavy toll on his body which required considerable time to recover. However, his suitability with the divine body was obviously getting better each time. Now, he was able to use the power from the divine body to enhance the divine methods he cultivated. The power of Gate of World Suppression was particularly explosive, using the divine power of path obliteration within the body of Shunjia the Great Emperor. There was no telling how powerful it might be in its ultimate form. Above the firmament, those cultivators from Zhenchan Temple, when they felt that divine might, also felt their hearts skip a beat. They had an unpleasant premonition. "You guys evacuate first," a cultivator who had survived the first divine tribulation of the Great Path proposed, ordering those Renhuang who had not yet experienced the divine tribulation to withdraw. Obviously, they all felt a serious threat. In the distance, at different positions in the void, all these Renhuang began to retreat. However, horrible rumbling sounds came out, as the gate of world suppression attacked the infinite divine monuments. As they rained down, this corner of the sky was completely covered, along with the entire vast expanse. There was, in fact, nowhere to escape in this world. Those Renhuang cultivators were releasing their own power of the Great Path now. The powers blasted towards the divine monuments that came at them from above. But the divine monuments were even more terrifying when coupled with Yi Futian's own strength. The gate of world suppression, as unleashed by Yi Futian, would be difficult enough for these Renhuang to block. But now, as urged with the divine body's path obliteration power, it was nearly impossible. Bang, bang, bang. A series of terrifying sounds were heard, and many Renhuang were killed on the spot, as they could not block Yi Futian's attack. Then, more Renhuang fell one after another until, in a blink of an eye, more than half of the cultivators who had arrived were either killed or injured. The divine body of Shenjia the Great Emperor was suspended in midair, the divine light shining all over it. The scene was mighty beyond words. Yi Futian, who had been pressured time and time again by these people, finally unleashed all the power within his disposal. He was ready to do his worst. Chapter 2452, Attack. After this blow landed, the cultivators who had been closing in on Yi Futian were knocked even farther back. Some cultivator who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path was retreating due to the injuries he received. When the gate of world suppression blasted towards him, he spat out a mouthful of blood. It was as if all his internal organs had been greatly impacted. Terrible rumbling sounds emerged as infinite runes surrounded heaven and earth. Its coercion was overwhelming. Yi Futian looked in a direction and saw that the cultivator from before with the heavenly eye now wanted to get a piece of him. Shenjia the Great Emperor raised his arm, and immediately, the infinite runes gathered together. Each rune was a character that spelled out sword, and they surrounded the divine body. An aura of path obliteration permeated the entire area. Then, Yi Futian pointed in the direction of the man. In an instant, the infinite runes rolled forward and submerged the space. A divine sword appeared to pierce through heaven and the earth. As soon as the man felt that something was amiss, his body flew into rapid retreat at an unimaginable speed. At the same time, the heavenly eye in his brow chakra shot out at Yi Futian again. However, this time, the skyful of runes swept at him directly, forcing the divine light from the heavenly eye to flow back from where it came. That sword strike ignored the distance as it locked onto its opponent and chased him into the far distance. The cultivator with the heavenly eye knew that there was nowhere for him to run. As he let out a mighty shout, the divine light in the heavenly eye was released to the extreme, and he threw the divine halberd in his hand forward again. A beam of light seemed to penetrate through heaven and earth, just like before, and the two attacks collided again. But this time, the strike that Yi Futian unleashed seemed to be far stronger than before. The destructive runes directly flooded the space and pushed towards him. This time, everything was destroyed, and the divine light that bloomed from the heavenly eye was also retreating. His body retreated like a stream of light. It was not because he took the initiative to move back, but that he was being pushed back by that terrifying force. He let out an angry roar. The divine light from the heavenly eye submerged the runes of swordsmanship in the front. It almost succeeded in blocking the momentum of the attack. Boom! There was a terrifying sound, and a storm of destruction raged in the space. His body was still moving in retreat, but he was somewhat relieved to see that the attack in front of him had gradually weakened. It seemed that he was still able to intercept this blow. "Watch out!" someone exclaimed from a distance. Yi Futian's heart skipped a beat when he heard it. Then, he saw a golden divine light directly shooting at him from the front. He could hardly see what it was. As the light was getting closer, it descended instantly in front of him, overlapping with the attacking divine sword as the two became one. Buzz! The light penetrated without much resistance, piercing through the light beam from the heavenly eye. He felt a sharp pain in his brow chakra, and a figure appeared in front of him. It was the divine body of Shenjia the Great Emperor. He placed his finger right on the heavenly eye of his brow chakra. At this moment, his eyes were filled with fear. No. As he squeezed out this last protest, his body was shattered. His soul and spirit were scattered and then destroyed. An existence who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path was killed right on the spot. All of this seemed like an uncanny instance of déjà vu, reminiscent of when Great Elder of Mortien had been killed. Both had been pierced by a simple sword strike and had perished. This place was quite far from the previous battlefield, but spatial distance was nothing to cultivators of this level. After witnessing the fall of the cultivator with the heavenly eye, the others trembled fiercely. They seemed to have underestimated the prowess of Futian. The sleeping Ahat could not influence his combat effectiveness, neither could the heavenly eye when it came to restraining him. It had not been long since the fighting started, and there were already heavy casualties. Futian turned his head and looked at them with chilling eyes. "Whoever keeps on chasing us will not be spared," he said menacingly. When his voice faded, he took Hua Jiu into a stream of light and continued moving ahead without killing any other cultivators. Although he was the one who started the killing spree, it was not his objective. Right now, he wanted to leave and get out of this mess as soon as possible. A sustained fight would take more time. For him, it meant an increased degree of danger, which he was not willing to risk. Naturally, he wanted to leave as quickly as he possibly could. Those cultivators did not continue to pursue him after he left. Obviously, the short battle they were engaged in gave them a much clearer idea of Futian's combat effectiveness. With the help of the divine body, prolonged engagement in battle would only spell their own deaths, even if they joined their power. Futian didn't kill them because he didn't have time. Also, he was worried about the arrival of more powerful individuals. Because of this, he was in a hurry to leave. "What should we do?" a cultivator asked at this time. They gave chase here and had been slaughtered by Futian. Now, they had allowed him to leave, so they could not possibly reveal their failed attempt if he were to re-emerge. They had lost a cultivator who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path, as well as many top Renhuang. The loss they suffered was not easily ignored. "What can we do?" asked someone. Another person replied, "We lack in strength, so what can we do? All we can do is go back and admit guilt, but it won't be that easy for him to just walk away either." The person next to him nodded in agreement. Although Saint Zhenchan would not make a move himself, top-level cultivators were already on the way. Futian had slaughtered so many cultivators from Zhenchan Temple, it would be unrealistic to think that he could get away unscathed. Never mind that Futian was still inside the territory of the Six Desires Heaven. Even if he managed to escape from Six Desires Heaven somehow, he would be mistaken to think that would be the end of the matter. "Let's go back," another person said. Everyone turned around to levitate into the sky. However, they appeared rather beaten, as this defeat made them feel rather frustrated. They had come with such a powerful group and thought that they had Futian well in hand. But they would now return with such a heavy loss and without their intended subject. It was all very discouraging. People at this level always thought highly of themselves. After all, they were already at the top of the cultivational world, but this world had been turned upside down by a youngster. After they left, many people came to the battlefield here. A lot of them were shocked. They had all witnessed the terrifying battle that took place in the void and gathered that it must be the person that Saint Zhenchan had issued a kill order, but they could never suspect the person was this powerful. The storm that Futian caused in Six Desires Heaven was indeed terrifying, and it had thrown things into disarray. First, he killed the Great Elder of Mortien and then caused the destruction of Six Desires Heavenly Palace and the deaths of Lord Six Desires and Lord Initial Zen. Now Zhenchan Temple had ordered a thorough search of the entire Six Desires Heaven to pursue him until he was apprehended. It was not an exaggeration to say that he had managed to shock the entire Six Desires Heaven all on his own. But Futian didn't think so much about all that at the moment. He was still en route in his escape. Although he had killed many cultivators, he did not dare to be careless, moving fast in the direction away from Six Desires Heaven. Right now, he was still in the territory under Saint Zhenchan's control, and it was imperative for him to leave as soon as possible. He didn't feel great. On the contrary, he had a sickening premonition. The prior interception of those cultivators meant that they still had a way to locate him. If someone else at the Lord level arrived, he would be in imminent danger. Although he had become even more adept at controlling the divine body, It was still a tall order for him to fight against a top cultivator at the Lord level. Once he was intercepted by someone at this level, it would become a matter of life and death. Chapter 2453, No Way Up to Heaven. Yi Futian flew as high as he could so that he would be an even smaller target. In the midst of clouds, the golden divine light appeared like lightning. This was the first time he was moving with such urgency. Every time he shuttled through the void, a hint of golden brilliance was left behind in the clouds and mist, leaving traces. Even a faint aura of the great path remained, holding with some residual information. But this was unavoidable. In order to move as fast as he could, he had to resort to using the power of the great path. Unless he continued to hide in a house as before, but even that seemed futile now. Saint Zhenchan had ordered all of 6 desires heaven to be searched. Images of Yi Futian were posted everywhere. The vast majority of the cultivators in 6 desires heaven probably knew of their existence already. If they appeared anywhere they could be seen, they risked being exposed, increasing the danger they were already in. Time passed, and Yi Futian had no idea how long it had been. But he had a feeling of doom. This feeling was completely without reason, yet it made him more than a little uncomfortable. Jiyu, I will send you down there. Then, let's separate, Yi Futian proposed to Hua Jiyu, who was beside him. The person Zhenchan Temple wanted was him. If they went on their separate ways, they would only follow him, not Hua Jiyu. Hua Jiyu looked at his eyes and shook her head. At times like this, there was no way for her to leave Yi Futian. They both understood that the events they had experienced before were largely due to their incredible luck. It was Lord Six Desires and Lord Initial Zen's carelessness that caused them to fall into the trap Yi Futian had set out for them. But now, if he were really taken by the people from Zhenchan Temple, his luck wouldn't continue as before. Saint Zhenchan would, no doubt, make sure that he would stay under his thumb. Moreover, Saint Zhenchan was someone higher in status than both Lord Six Desires and Lord Initial Zen, so it was safe to assume that his strength far exceeded their own. If Yi Futian were captured, there would be no way up to heaven and no way down to hell either. At times like this, she had no desire to go anywhere else. All she wanted to do was share his fate with him. Whether they lived or died, at least they would be together. Looking at the expression in Hua Jiyu's eyes, Yi Futian knew that he couldn't persuade her, so he resolved to hurry forward. That ill-fated feeling became stronger as time went by. Gradually, he had a vague sense that someone was tagging along. More importantly, this feeling was getting stronger. He keenly realized that he had been tracked down and that a top cultivator was spying on him. Unexpectedly, there was yet another top-ranking lord. It seemed that he had underestimated Zhenchan Temple. However, the other party didn't seem to be in a hurry to do anything, content with keeping tabs on him for now. This made him feel terribly uneasy. Yi Futian knew that even though he was currently in control of Shunjia the Great Emperor's divine body, it was draining his energy. His realm was limited, and the strength of his spiritual soul was also limited. Since he was unable to fully control the divine body, he did so by consuming the power of his spiritual soul non-stop. The longer this whole affair dragged out, the weaker he would be in the future. Yi Futian could feel that the one who was tracking him was not overly eager. As long as he was under his watch and did not escape, it was enough for the moment. This time, a top-notch figure didn't show any impatience. Yi Futian understood why he had such an ominous premonition. Finally, Yi Futian stopped moving forward, but the feeling of being followed remained. He knew he couldn't get rid of the cultivator who was hiding in the dark, so he simply stopped. The body of Shunjia the Great Emperor stood in the clouds as mist while Yi Futian surveyed their surroundings. He released his divine consciousness and vaguely felt a powerful aura, though he could not detect its source. Since the elder has already arrived, why continue lurking in the dark? Why not show yourself? Yi Futian said as if to no one in particular. Benevolence. The response was only one word. Golden light was shining everywhere. A figure appeared in the sky above Yi Futian, bathing in the golden divine light. The figure that appeared there was rather corpulent. One could even describe him as someone with a rather fat head and copious ears. The man's head was shaved, like a monk's, but he was not really a monk. His whole body was shining with golden lights. It was hard to imagine that such a portly man could manage speed so fast that he was able to find Yi Futian and stay on his tail. Is Elder also from Zhenchan Temple? Yi Futian asked, still holding a slight sense of hope in his heart. The fat man smiled and nodded slightly. Not only did he come from Zhenchan Temple, but he was the number 2 person in charge of Zhenchan Temple, the deputy lord of Zhenchan Temple. Even Lord Initial Zen had to pay proper respect to him when he saw the man. Although this operation had been ordered by Saint Zhenchan, it was, in fact, supervised by the fat man. It was no surprise that he was the first person to track down Yi Futian. How about you come to Zhenchan Temple with me? Lord Blubber said to Yi Futian with a smile. He spoke just like a friend. His tone was calm and casual, not showing the slightest maliciousness. It seemed that the whole thing was a friendly invitation. You have to forgive me. I can't, Yi Futian replied. If you don't go by yourself, then you will leave me no choice but to force my hand. Why do you want to do that? It would be extremely unwise. The man continued to advocate for his cause, but Yi Futian looked at him and responded, You leave me no other choice. How much strength can you borrow from the divine body? Lord Blubber asked again. Whatever it is, it will be hard-pressed to compete with you, Elder, Yi Futian replied. If that's the case, then why do you continue to resist? The other man exhorted. Take a walk with me, and perhaps those who around you may stay safe. If you don't comply, I will have no choice but to take action. If, by chance, the goddess next to you gets hurt, it would be very unfortunate. Yi Futian frowned. This Lord Blubber seemed to be friendly and amicable on the outside, always speaking with a smile on his face, but his words suggested he was definitely not some gentle, harmless creature. On the contrary, he may very well be a plotting, scheming, ruthless snake, as he was now threatening Yi Futian by using Hua Jiyu. Yi Futian lowered his head to look at Hua Jiyu, who was next to him. The two looked at each other. He could see that there was no fear in her eyes. Now, all they could do was face this problem calmly and openly. Elder, please make a move if you must. Yi Futian raised his head again and said to Lord Blubber, who was in the sky. As you wish, the other responded and proceeded to clasp his plump hands together. In an instant, the entire firmament shook violently. In this area high above, an incomparably radiant light of Buddha manifested as if to block off all other heavens and created a world that was on its own. Numerous massive and boundless symbols of WAN had completely shut down this corner of the sky. These symbols of WAN interlocked and turned into a giant hole. The symbol continued to circle the firmament, accompanied by terrible booming sounds. The sky seemed to be on the verge of collapse, but Yi Futian and Hua Jiyu stood there without moving. They could feel shockwaves running through their bodies constantly. Yi Futian could clearly feel that the symbol of WAN, as released by the cultivator in front of him, was completely different from the symbol of WAN he had endured before. The difference was more than a little. Under this symbol of WAN, everything had no choice but to be crushed. Boom! Along with the descent of a terrifying divine light, this symbol of WAN spiraled down at an incredible speed. It was as if a light had hit Yi Futian's head. Shenjia the Great Emperor was radiant all over. Yi Futian pointed his finger at the sky, and countless runes of swordsmanship appeared, attempting to break through the supreme pressure from the symbol of WAN just like before. But this time, the sword will could not penetrate and smash through it. It ended with the runes of the sword characters being totally destroyed. With a loud boom, the divine body shook and fell from the sky. On the other hand, a series of symbols of WAN came down from the void as if trying to suppress everything in this world. Chapter 2454, No Way Down to Hell. Many symbols of WAN descended, layer upon layer. It was as if each layer contained infinite supreme powers capable of suppressing the Great Path. They were descending continuously upon the divine body of Shenjia the Great Emperor. Boom, boom, boom. The divine body of Shenjia the Great Emperor was being blasted continuously by those madly falling symbols. The spiritual soul inside his body was rocked. Even Hua Jiyu, who he was protecting behind him, was also shaken. Finally, the divine body stopped as it had nowhere to retreat. Both of his legs fell on the symbol of WAN. This entire space was full of symbols of WAN. The same held true for the space below. There was absolutely nowhere for him to go. Heavy forces of thousandfold continued to blast down from above, causing the divine body to let out a frightening roar. Futian controlled the divine body, making it raise both hands. It pushed against a giant symbol of WAN. When each symbol fell, it shook the divine body vigorously. Even his spiritual soul trembled because of it. Lord Blubber had no intention to stop his attack. Every blow he dealt was tens of millions times more powerful than anticipated, chipping away Futian's ability to resist. Gradually, the whole divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor was bent and could no longer stand up straight. If this were not a divine body but a body of flesh and blood, perhaps it would have already collapsed and shattered. There was no way it could have endured all those attacks and lasted until now. When the last symbol of WN fell, a terrifying force swept out. Futian muffled a groan as his spiritual soul bore a terribly heavy load. Above the void, Lord Blubber lowered his head to glance down below. His objective was to capture Futian alive, not kill him, so he would have to pay close attention not to be too heavy-handed. If he accidentally smashed Futian's spiritual soul, it would be a terrible mistake. Futian was still in control of the inheritances of several great emperors. He had already slaughtered many cultivators from Zhenchan Temple, so they needed to squeeze Futian for all his worth. Otherwise, how could they possibly justify the deaths of all those cultivators? Therefore, he would be careful and measured as not to obliterate Futian right away. Now, will you go with me? Lord Blubber lowered his head and said to Futian. Futian looked at the figure in the void and felt a little hopeless. The power of someone who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path, whose control over the power of the Great Path had already surpassed any common sense of the word, was overwhelming. Even though he possessed the power of path obliteration, Lord Blubber was still indestructible. This was completely determined by the difference between their realms. If he had also survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path, then with the help of the divine body, he should have no issue dealing with a figure at this level. But now, it was obviously too difficult. He lowered his head and glanced at Hua Jiyu. Even if the two were to become one, it would be hard for them to deal with a lord-level character, and their outcome would still be hopeless. Let her leave, and I will go with you to Zhenchan Temple, Futian said. No. Hua Jiyu refused when she heard Futian's words. Jiyu, I will go alone. There is still one last chance. If you are with me, I will be too worried, Futian said to Hua Jiyu via voice transmission. His tone was very solemn. Previously, he had wanted to let Hua Jiyu leave while they were on the road. But at that time, the ending was unknown, and they thought they might have a chance to escape Six Desires Heaven together. However, now that he had been intercepted by someone at the Lord level, he couldn't leave. However, Futian still had hopes that Hua Jiyu could get away. If he went to Zhenchan Temple by himself, he might still have a chance to fight for his life. Lord Blubber glanced at Futian and Hua Jiyu, then said with a smile, "Come out of the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor and submit to me, then we will talk." Previously, Futian had plotted against many people. The four lords, dead or injured, had all paid a heavy price. Now, even though he was always smiling as he dealt with Futian, Lord Blubber was still alert. Although he had completely suppressed the other and currently had the upper hand, he dared not let down his guard. He didn't mind Hua Jiyu leaving, but he needed to be absolutely sure that he had Futian under control before that happens. Only when Futian had completely relinquished the power of the divine body could he be under his control. With Lord Blubber's own realm, facing a Ren Huang of the 8th realm would be like a god facing a mortal. He could easily crush Futian and not worry about him making any more waves. Futian didn't look too great when he heard what the other said. Lord Blubber seemed to intend on controlling him completely and have him surrender the divine body. If that happened, then no matter what happened, Futian would no longer have any advantage and would really be akin to some lowly insect in front of Lord Blubber. No, Futian refused without hesitation. If this is the case, and Elder reneges, I won't stand a chance. Do you think you have a chance now? Lord Blubber asked with a smile. If so, let us continue. As soon as his voice fell, a terrifying aura descended once more, and the domain of the Great Path released a terrifying divine light. The symbol of WAN was shining with radiant divine light, pressing downward, layer by layer, with overwhelming coercion. If Elder insists, then you can be sure I will never go to Zhenchan Temple no matter the cost, even if my life ends here today. And before I die, I will destroy the vitality within the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor, Yi Futian said with no uncertainty. This way, Zhenchan Temple will have nothing to gain. Lord Blubber raised his eyebrow slightly when he heard Yi Futian's words. Could Yi Futian really destroy the vitality within the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor? Xinjia the Great Emperor had long perished, but the divine body he left behind still contained divine power, which could also be considered its vitality. After Yi Futian had assumed control over the Great Emperor's body, he was able to urge the divine body and the divine power therein. However, if he were really to destroy the vitality, could that really destroy the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor? However, Yi Futian was a cunning character, and everything that happened before proved that. How credible were his words? But even if he had doubts, he didn't quite have the resolve to make a decision right now. What if it was true? More importantly, Yi Futian's life was far more valuable than Hua Jiyu's. He actually didn't care much about Hua Jiyu. As far as Zhenchan Temple was concerned, she was unimportant. However, the presence of Hua Jiyu would allow them to control Yi Futian better. But just at this moment, another terrifying divine light descended from above the firmament. A brilliant beam of light came down directly from outside of the sky, covering the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor. The power of heavenly might dropped, which changed the look in the eyes of Yi Futian. This aura was even mightier than Lord Blubber's. An even stronger character had now arrived. Lord Blubber raised his head to look beyond the sky at this moment. The smile in his eyes was replaced by a solemn expression. In the next moment, a group of godlike figures appeared where the divine light was shining. The middle-aged man in the lead had a superior temperament. He was clad in a long golden robe, and he had pitch-black long black hair. Nonetheless, he was surrounded by a detectable air of Buddhism. The golden light was shining in an extremely radiant display around him, and he exuded an unparalleled majesty and authority. My lord. Lord Blubber nodded to acknowledge the middle-aged man who appeared in the void, making Yi Futian's heart tremble. The lord of Zhenchan Temple, Saint Zhenchan, had come in person. A golden halo seemed to be hovering behind him, giving an irresistible sense of might. He looked like a true heavenly god. The cultivators who came with him were also extraordinary characters, standing quietly behind him and looking down at Yi Futian below. Yi Futian couldn't help but let out a sigh. They must have thought highly of him to dispatch such a group of cultivators to deal with him. Chapter 2455, No Choice. Yi Futian naturally understood that Saint Zhenchan had come here. Yi Futian could also tell how highly the latter viewed him. He would not stop until he took down Yi Futian. When Yi Futian was under the control of Lord Six Desires in the Six Desires Heavenly Palace, Saint Zhenchan had merely sent messengers to ask that Yi Futian be sent over to Zhenchan Temple. Saint Zhenchan's attitude was overbearing, and he clearly did not treat the Six Desires Heavenly Palace as an equal. Now, he had come in person to take Yi Futian back with him. Yi Futian did not know whether or not he should feel honored. Greetings, Senior Saint Zhenchan, Yi Futian greeted as he looked at Saint Zhenchan in the sky. Although Saint Zhenchan was his opponent, he still minded his manners. However, Saint Zhenchan was not as friendly as Yi Futian was. He gazed down at the figure below. A cold look flashed past in his domineering gaze as he said, I never thought that Lord Initial Zen would perish to you. Saint Zhenchan did not care as to whether Lord Six Desires was dead or alive. However, Lord Initial Zen was considered his junior and was a figure at the level of a lord. He had fallen to Yi Futian's scheme and perished. If Yi Futian did not possess so many secrets, Saint Zhenchan would have killed Yi Futian with a single palm strike. However, he would not do so. Yi Futian still had value. At least for now, he would not kill Yi Futian. Senior Lord Initial Zen had me against the wall. I had no choice, replied Yi Futian. Saint Shunchan naturally ignored Yi Futian's explanation. He swept a cold and indifferent gaze at Yi Futian and calmly ordered, "Take him away." As he said this, Lord Blubber's smile returned. He said to Yi Futian, "Let's go." As he said this, two top-tier renhuangs descended and walked towards Yi Futian and Hua Jiyu. Their figures floated in the sky above Yi Futian as they said, "Your spiritual soul may return to its original body." They said this with a commanding tone. There was no room for negotiation. Although Yi Futian was powerful and could kill existences who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path, Saint Shunchan had come in person. Right now, he did not dare to resist. That would be suicidal. Under such circumstances, Yi Futian had no choice but to obey and follow them to Zhenchan Temple. For Yi Futian, he was indeed in dire straits. There was nowhere to run now. If he obeyed and followed the other party, how would he end up? Hua Jiyu and his fate would be beyond their control. They would be at the mercy of the other party's whims. Yi Futian had also killed many cultivators from Zhenchan Temple. Would the other party spare him? Clearly, this was the path to his doom. On the other hand, if he did not follow the other party, how would he deal with the situation at hand? Right now, he was in danger of being killed off. Right now, at this very moment, it seemed that he had reached the end of the line. He raised his head and looked at the renhuangs in the sky. They had imposing and overbearing manners. When they faced him, these renhuangs from Zhenchan Temple bore an air of arrogance. It seemed to be their innate temperament. It might also be because they were from Zhenchan Temple that they acted so high and mighty. In the sky, various cultivators looked down at them as though they were enjoying a show. Their expressions were cold and indifferent. There was even a look of pity in their eyes, as though they felt sorry for him. Lord Blubber was still smiling as though he had been doing so forever. Saint Shunchan did not even look at Yi Futian, instead turning his back to him. It seemed that he was prepared to leave. No one believed that Yi Futian would refuse and resist. They were all waiting for one outcome, for Yi Futian to disarm himself and obediently follow them to Zhenchan Temple. Yi Futian suddenly realized that the reason the almighty Saint Shunchan had come in person, aside from how highly he viewed Yi Futian, was not because he was worried that Lord Blubber could not bring Yi Futian back with him. Saint Shunchan might be worried that Lord Blubber would have his own personal agenda. Hence, he had come in person. Everything around him seemed to pause. Inside the divine body of Shunjia the Great Emperor, Yi Futian quietly observed all of this as he gradually calmed down. From the look in his eyes, he actually seemed to gradually ease up. It was as though he would calmly accept any outcome. Since it had come to this, everything else was meaningless. Saint Shunchan, ever since I arrived in the Western world, everything I did was because my hand was forced. If I willingly hand over the divine body, would you promise to let us two leave? Yi Futian asked. His voice was extremely calm at this moment. With Saint Shunchan standing, in such a situation before the various cultivators, he would not lie to Yi Futian. Hence, he asked this final question. It was to give himself an opportunity. Are you qualified to negotiate with me? Saint Shunchan answered Yi Futian with his back turned towards the latter. His tone was indifferent, without the slightest hint of emotion. Yi Futian was not qualified to negotiate with him. Take him away, Saint Shunchan mumbled. Immediately, the two renhuangs gazed down at Yi Futian and ordered, "Make haste." Yi Futian raised his head and swept a glance at them. They were both top-tier renhuangs and would be considered extraordinary figures wherever they went. They belonged to the group of individuals who stood at the top of the pyramid. However, right now, Yi Futian's eyes were filled with a look of cold disdain. Weren't they relying on Saint Shunchan's power to throw their weight around? If it was just these two renhuangs without the backing of Saint Shunchan, would they dare act this way to him? Even if Yi Futian did not rely on the divine body, killing them both would be child's play. Are the two of you even qualified to order me around? Said Yi Futian. He glanced at the two renhuangs as ferocious divine light shone from his eyes. Countless runes radiated out from the divine body. In an instant, the two renhuangs felt themselves descending into the domain of path obliteration. Their expressions changed drastically. However, it was already too late. Yi Futian immediately raised his hand and clenched his fist. A gigantic hand directly reached out and subdued the two renhuangs. Beneath the terrifying gigantic hand, the two of them did not have the strength to free themselves at all. Presumptuous, a cultivator in the air chided angrily. Yi Futian actually dared to resist and attack the renhuangs who were to lead him away. Was he seeking his own death? Under such circumstances, Yi Futian was actually still resisting. By following them, there was at least a chance for a different ending for him. However, he was now resisting. Even if he was not concerned about himself, had he not considered the well-being of his woman? Saint Xunchan also turned around. He clearly had not imagined that Yi Futian would resist now. I told you that everything that I have done since I came to Six Desires Heaven was because I was forced to, Yi Futian said in a voice as cold as ice. He then clenched his fist. A frightening rumbling sound could be heard. The two renhuangs let out horrifying screams. They immediately perished to the giant hand and were executed on the spot. In an instant, terrifying auras descended and enveloped the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor. Even the smile on Lord Blubber's face had disappeared. He appeared somewhat surprised. They were surprised why Yi Futian could not read the room and had actually resisted in such a situation. He had even gotten violent and committed murder. Did he wish to be killed? Saint Xunchan's overbearing gaze turned cold. Yi Futian had actually killed his subordinates right before his eyes. Heavenly might descended. At that moment, the space was filled with endless murderous intent. It made others feel as though their spiritual souls were suffocating. Chapter 2456, Destroy. You're seeking your own death. Saint Xunchan gazed down below as he said this in a voice as cold as ice. When he said this, he made a grab at the space down below. Immediately, a gigantic Buddhist palm appeared in the sky. It radiated with divine halos and enshrouded the sun. The entire space was within the palm's reach. This enormous palm tried to grab the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor. The body of Xinjia the Great Emperor shone brilliantly as endless runes leaped around it. The runes enveloped Yi Futian and Hua Jiyu, forming a protective shroud. Rumble. The gigantic palm smacked down. The runes transformed into a star-light screen, as though the divine body was encircled by stars. However, the screen still could not block the terrifying attack of the palm. Rumbling sounds could be heard as the screen slowly shattered. The gigantic palm grasped the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor and lifted it toward where Saint Xunchan was. To the side, Lord Blubber cast a glance at the scene indifferently. He was expressionless. Yi Futian indeed did not know what was good for himself. If he allowed himself to be captured and brought away, he would at least have a chance of survival even though he would suffer severe losses. He could still bet on a chance of negotiating some terms with Saint Xunchan. However, Yi Futian chose to oppose Saint Xunchan blatantly. He actually killed two renhuangs in front of everyone. His act was no different from leaving himself no way out. What he did was definitely unwise. If this continued, it would most likely not end well for both him and Hua Jiyu. Before this, Lord Blubber had believed that Yi Futian was smart. However, right now, he was obviously a bit unwise. The divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor was grabbed and dragged up. The gigantic palm retracted and appeared below Saint Xunchan. He lowered his head and looked at Yi Futian, who was grabbed by the gigantic palm. In a cold and indifferent tone, he said, "Will you come out on your own accord, or do you need me to force you out?" Yi Futian raised his head and looked at the majestic figure. An extremely cold light shot out from the eyes of Xinjia the Great Emperor. It seemed to bear a look of decisiveness. "Jiyu," Yi Futian called out to Hua Jiyu as he turned back and looked at her. Hua Jiyu smiled and nodded her head. There was only a calm look on her face that was as beautiful as that of a goddess. There was no sign of the terror of meeting their end on her face. It was obvious that she, like Yi Futian, was already prepared to face anything. Since it had come to this, she would let Yi Futian choose what to do. Regardless of what he wanted to do or what the outcome would be, she was willing to follow him and bear the consequences together with him, even if the outcome might be death. However, They had no choice in this. All of this was because Saint Xunchan had them against the wall. Yi Futian turned back and looked up into the sky. Frightening rumbling sounds could be heard. The defensive light shroud was still shattering in the gigantic palm. However, at the same time, an unparalleled power burst forth from inside the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor. Beams of divine light shot out from inside the divine body, growing brighter. When Saint Xunchan saw this scene, he coldly snorted. He suddenly clenched his fist forcefully. The defensive light shroud immediately shattered. The fist continued clenching, closing in on the divine body. At that moment, the terrifying divine light that shot out from inside the divine body actually made it difficult for the gigantic hand to continue closing. There were even signs that the hand would be pierced through. This made Saint Xunchan frown. Yi Futian could break through his attack. Rumble. A terrifying sound could be heard. The divine body seemed to go berserk. As divine light shot out, the divine body was actually growing larger. This scene caused Saint Xunchan and Lord Blubber to reveal strange expressions. Prior to this, they had never heard of the divine body expanding in size before. What was Yi Futian doing? Right now, inside the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor, Yi Futian's spiritual soul transformed into an ancient tree and seeped into every part of the divine body. An illusory figure flashed inside the body. The illusory figure was none other than Yi Futian. He revealed a look of agony as he howled with a gruff voice. Menacing rumbling sounds could be heard continuously. The world inside the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor expanded frenziedly. Countless years ago, Xinjia the Great Emperor was indestructible after he had proven his way. After he passed away, he left behind his divine body. The divine body was the flesh of a deity. At the same time, it was also an independent world on its own. Outside of the body, the radiating divine light tore apart all existence. The gigantic palm instantly crumbled to dust. Countless runes enveloped the vast space and enshrouded the sun. Both Saint Xunchan and Lord Blubber were trapped within the runes. Of course, trapped along with them within the runes were all the cultivators from Xunchan Temple. Saint Xunchan's brows furrowed. A divine figure appeared in front of him. It looked like the figure of Xinjia the Great Emperor, yet it also somewhat resembled Yi Futian. It was as though two of them had merged into one figure. "What is this?" mumbled Saint Xunchan. He had a bad feeling about this. With his level, he actually felt a sense of danger at the moment. This was originally impossible, yet he was indeed experiencing it now. Yi Futian actually made him feel a sense of danger. "What do you plan to do?" asked Lord Blubber as he looked at the silhouette of Yi Futian. His facial expression changed as well. He similarly sensed danger. "I have told you before. Since you don't believe me, I have no choice but to show you personally," Yi Futian answered. Lord Blubber suddenly recalled what Yi Futian had said before this. He revealed a shocked expression as he exclaimed, "Do you plan to destroy the divine body?" This was the body of Xinjia the Great Emperor. It was the flesh of a deity. A universe was stored within it. If Yi Futian destroyed it, how frightening would the outcome be? Lord Blubber naturally understood what a divine body consisted of. The destruction brought forth by the explosion of a divine body would be shocking. No wonder he sensed danger. Buzz. Menacing divine light of path obliteration swept out. This divine light of path obliteration was formed from the countless runes. It swept towards all the cultivators present. "Retreat," ordered Saint Xunchan decisively. His figure traversed the space with a single step, retreating far away. Right now, it was not the time for contemplating. This was a life-or-death situation even for him. "Destroy." The divine figure appeared hideous and contorted. It also seemed to be experiencing extreme pain. To destroy the divine body, Yi Futian had to push it to the point of self-destructing. The waves of divine light wiped out everything. Everywhere the light passed, everything was destroyed. All paths ceased existing. No power of the great path could withstand it. Ah! Screams could be heard. Under the destructive divine light, renhuangs were immediately torn to shreds. They could not resist at all. In an instant, they were eradicated and disintegrated. The destructive divine light expanded outward. The area it enveloped grew larger and larger. The vast space became a domain of path obliteration. The divine light of path obliteration swept out again and again. Right now, Futian was also experiencing tremendous pain. In the sky, a painful roar could be heard. Rumble. A dull thud sounded. The figure of Shenjia, the great emperor, exploded. Right then, divine light radiated out and flooded the space for billions of miles. It became a true domain of path obliteration. All great paths were destroyed. Within the light, Saint Zhenchan and Lord Blubber unleashed their full might to defend their figures from this destructive storm. They did not aim to fight against this power, only seeking self-preservation. At the same time, a beam of light shot out from within the destruction, bringing along the figures of Futian and Hua Jiyu as it left the world of destruction. It appeared to be the final ray of life. Chapter 2457, The Darkest Hours. A few days later, somewhere high above in Six Desires Heaven, countless cultivators had gathered around. Their attention was fixed on the field ahead. Golden runes were shining above the firmament, endless and infinite. It seemed as if it was a world of runes. This world covered an extensive area, traversing multiple cities within Six Desires Heaven. It was quite a spectacle. The vast majority of the Renhuang in Six Desires Heaven had been attracted to this place and appeared in the surrounding area of this domain world. Their hearts were greatly disturbed as they beheld the sight in front of them. No matter what levels of cultivators they were, when they felt that aura, they could feel their hearts tremble. Although all of them were looking from the outside, none of them dared step inside. The aura within was far too terrifying, like an air of extinction. Each and every rune seemed to contain the power that could destroy the Great Path, making that vast expansive realm an absolute space of path obliteration. There was no other great path that could exist within this space, except for the force of destruction formed by those infinite runes. It was a vacuum for a world. That's too scary. Only death awaits anyone who walks inside, some top-notch Renhuang mumbled with solemn expressions and extremely uneasy hearts. They couldn't believe such a strange sight like this was actually happening in Six Desires Heaven. And what happened here had spread through gossip, at first. However, as the storm continued and widened, the news was dispersing throughout Six Desires Heaven with incredible speed so that it was known to every cultivator in the entire Six Desires Heaven. This terrifying domain of path obliteration was formed by the explosion of a divine body. A god-level figure's physical body had exploded, exposing its internal world to the outside, creating a world of destruction that traversed endless space to form this domain of path obliteration. Has anyone witnessed that battle? Someone asked. Do you think it's possible? The person next to him responded. With such destructive power, any witness would surely die upon the destructive power erupting. No one who saw it could live to tell the tale. That's true. The person who asked the question felt a little stupid, but he still felt it was a pity, such an epic battle with no living witness. A single Renhuang took down the entire Zhenchan temple not too long ago. Zhenchan temple was searching for any traces of Futian in Six Desires Heaven. Who would have thought that it would cause such horrible consequences and end like this? Now, it seems that whether it was Six Desires Heaven or Zhenchan temple, they were both plotting to obtain the divine body that was in Futian's possession, someone else whispered. Well, it's just that no one expected that Futian could actually cause the divine body to explode. That light of destruction illuminated half of all of Six Desires Heaven, which was indescribably horrible. This time, Zhenchan temple suffered a heavy loss. It was really a disaster. Everyone was talking about it, and with complicated emotions. No one could have thought that a Renhuang, rumored to have come from Divine Prefecture, would upset Six Desires Heaven like this. Six Desires Heavenly Palace had been destroyed, and the Renhuang had killed 2 out of the 4 great lords, with 2 more wounded. When Zhenchan temple came to apprehend him, even Saint Zhenchan himself had arrived in person. But in the end it was said that almost all the cultivators from Zhenchan temple were wiped out. Any cultivators below the realm of Saint Zhenchan were completely obliterated. Even the deputy lord himself had perished under that attack of total annihilation. Another Lord-level casualty in that utter disaster. Only Saint Xunchan was able to walk out of there alive. No one knew what Saint Xunchan had experienced in that storm of destruction, but they heard that when some witnesses saw Saint Xunchan emerge from that world of destruction, he was covered in blood, barely alive. That high and mighty saint had almost perished in this disaster. He was lucky that he got out with his life. However, even if one managed to survive this storm, it would be at a great cost. Even an existence such as Saint Xunchan was covered in blood and near death. It was said that when he finally emerged, he had great difficulty levitating into the sky. One could only imagine the severity of his injuries. At present, there were all kinds of rumors circulating in Six Desires Heaven. Some said that Saint Xunchan's body was filled with the scars of the Great Path. Some also said that Saint Xunchan's Great Path Foundation had been utterly destroyed. But no matter what, the truth was that Saint Xunchan had lost the battle wretchedly, and it would probably take him a long time to recover. There was probably no way for him to return to his original state in a short time. The news of what happened in Six Desires Heaven even spread to other heavens, especially news that Xunchan Temple had almost been destroyed. This was not just a notable event in Six Desires Heaven but was also of great interest to the entire Western world. Several days later, the divine mountain where Xunchan Temple was located was surrounded by a golden divine light. It radiated with the light of Buddha as if it was a place of cultivation for the great Buddha. Xunchan Temple was the place where Saint Xunchan cultivated. Currently, Xunchan Temple was in a state of chaos. Saint Xunchan took many powerful cultivators from Xunchan Temple with him on his quest, and their deputy lord was also out to capture Yi Futian, so now at this moment, an extremely frightening aura came from the void, shrouded the entire Xunchan Temple. As the divine light lingered, a group of cultivators descended. This was yet another superpower from the Western world. The man in the lead was surrounded by divine light, compelled all the cultivators from Xunchan Temple to bow down to him in worship. The divine consciousnesses of those cultivators swept through and enveloped Xunchan Temple. It antagonized the cultivators from Xunchan Temple. This was an absolutely unthinkable offense that would have never happened before. However, though they were deeply hurt now, they dared not express it, neither did they dare to voice their displeasure. They did not yet know whether their lord, Saint Xunchan, was dead or alive. If Saint Xunchan were to meet some unfortunate end, they probably wouldn't fare any better themselves either. "Is the saint not back yet?" the cultivator in the lead asked. His voice reverberated within the entire temple. "No, not yet," someone below answered respectfully. The man nodded and continued, "I have heard what happened at Six Desires Heaven. The saint may be recuperating at the moment. As for Xunchan Temple, in order to avoid interference from outsiders, I will stay here for the time being and wait for the saint to return." Everyone who heard this was speechless, but what the man said was indeed the truth. If the saint had been severely injured, it was possible that he may not return to Xunchan Temple for the time being. After all, within the many years it took for him to cultivate to this level, he had accrued many enemies. So, there was no telling how many adversaries were lying in wait. Normally, no one would dare to do anything out of bounds like this. But if they knew that the saint had been injured severely, it would give some of them ideas. Therefore, the saint might not be able to return in the foreseeable future. However, the presence of these people here was certainly not due to altruism but rather their desire to take over Xunchan Temple. If Saint Xunchan were to return someday, safe and sound, they could say they were here to protect the temple. But if not, then despite knowing the truth, no one dared to refute the man. Ultimately, they could only accept it. Of course. All of them nodded but felt extremely humiliated inside. But what else could they do? This had to be the greatest humiliation that Xunchan Temple had ever suffered in 1,000 years. These truly were the darkest hours for Xunchan Temple. All because of some youngster. Chapter 2458, Convergence. At Six Desires Heaven, on an ordinary mountaintop, was an ancient temple. At this moment, a man in tattered clothing was walking up the stairs outside the ancient temple with heavy footsteps, and he seemed a little tired. The ancient trees on both sides of the stairs swayed gently, covering the steps full of leaves. That figure, climbing up, seemed a little lonesome. As he climbed up, he came to the very top of the staircase, where a monk was sweeping the leaves. When he saw someone came up the stairs, he stopped what he was doing and said to the man while looking at him, "Sir, this temple is not accepting donations or visitors." The man nodded gently as he clasped his hands in front of him and said to the monk, "I passed by here because of chance alone. Or perhaps this was destiny. May I stay in this temple for a while?" The monk put down his brooms and clasped his hands together in return as he bowed to the visitor and replied, "We have rules in our temple that we do not accept donations, so naturally, we cannot receive visitors either. I hope you understand, sir. I am neither a pilgrim nor a visitor. Master must be able to see that I have suffered some serious injuries and require a place to rest for a while. I am here because of Buddha's guidance. May I be so bold as to ask if Master could make an exception and allow me to take refuge at the temple for a while?" The visitor continued to speak. His voice sounded a little pathetic. Who could have imagined that Saint Xunchan, whose name rang throughout the Western world, would be begging like this just to find a place to quietly cultivate and recuperate for a while? "Sir, please leave." The monk who was sweeping remained unconvinced. He continued in his effort to get rid of him. Saint Xunchan raised his head to look at the monk. An authoritative gaze appeared in his eyes. Just that gaze alone was enough to make the monk shudder. It was an innate temperament that was difficult to conceal, even if he had been severely injured. But it was only for a moment. All that majesty in his eyes disappeared in the next moment as Saint Xunchan silently turned around and walked down the steps, still looking a bit lonesome. He walked very slowly as if he could not move any faster. Someone walked out from the temple, looking at Saint Xunchan as he was leaving, and asked, "Who was that?" "I don't know." The sweeping monk shook his head. "Looked like someone with nowhere to go. Perhaps he wanted to con his way inside the temple." The person who came out nodded. "There are many people like this. You don't have to be so polite every time." "Very well." That sweeping monk nodded. He still remembered that look in the eyes of Saint Xunchan from before. It was an extremely complicated look and difficult to decipher. However, he was clearly a cripple who exuded no aura of cultivation, so why did he make him feel differently? Saint Xunchan heard the conversation between the two men, and his emotions were extremely turbulent. He never expected that one day, he would end up in the situation he was in. But as of now, he dared not disclose his identity to just anyone. He was once the high and mighty lord of Xunchan Temple, but he had his shares of enemies over the years. In addition, many of his cultivators had been killed by Futian on that day, when he caused that destructive power to erupt. If his identity were to be exposed and he was detected by someone with bad intentions, he would die very miserably. Right now, he was almost half disabled. He needed to find a quiet place to recuperate and recover for a period of time. He believed that, in time, with his strength derived from Buddhism, he would be able to get back on his feet, recover from his injuries, and return to his previous state of power. At a moment like this, he vowed he would make Futian so miserable one day that the young man would wish for death. And also, that wife of his. He, Xunchan, had never suffered such humiliation as he did today. Many days later, in the great Brahma heaven of the Western world. In the void, a goddess-like figure traveled through the air. Her face was gorgeous and stunning. She was otherworldly. But at this moment, she was holding a person between her arms. This man was clad in white with white hair, deeply unconscious. However, his handsome visage could still be seen. These two were none other than Hua Jiyu and Futian. On that day, Futian caused the divine body of Shunjia the Great Emperor to self-destruct. The resulting terrifying power swept through Six Desires Heaven. The divine body turned into a domain world of annihilation, sitting right above Six Desires Heaven, destroying and slaughtering the cultivators from Xunchan Temple. However, Futian also paid a heavy price in exchange. Even he didn't know what would happen, so he had planned for the worst possible outcome. He had discussed with Hua Jiyu, and they both agreed that they were willing to face all the consequences. Since they had been forced into this desperate situation, this was all they could do in response. They knew that once they had been taken away, Their destiny would no longer be under their own control but would be under the control of the others. After Yi Futian's spiritual soul urged the divine body to explode, he used that last trace of power in the spiritual soul to bring Hua Jiyu out of that realm of annihilation and escaped that corner of the world. Afterward, his spiritual soul returned to his body and fell into a deep slumber. In that world of path obliteration, Hua Jiyu was almost wiped out as well. This time, the two of them were lucky to get out with their lives. Hua Jiyu had no expression on her face. She was only concentrating on moving forward. Ahead of her, a group of cultivators was coming towards them. They rode on a golden-winged rock and flew towards them with incredible speed. Mo Yunzi, the golden-winged rock, was connected with Yi Futian psychically and knew the exact location of Yi Futian, which was how he was able to locate them. Seeing their arrival, Hua Jiyu stopped right away. Blind Tai, Chen Yi, and the others stepped forward to check on Yi Futian's condition. Teacher. Little Ling and the others' expression was one of slight concern. Yi Futian's condition seemed to be more serious than they had expected. It had been so many days, and he was still in a coma. Let's find a place to stay first, said Hua Jiyu. Everyone nodded in agreement as they then stepped onto the back of the golden-winged rock. The divine bird spread its wings and started shuttling through the void. Zhenchan Temple had no reason to bully and persecute us like this. Fang Kun looked at Yi Futian and said coldly, we will have to decimate Zhenchan Temple for good. Hua Jiyu watched them in silence. It seemed that they knew all that had happened. As if she heard Hua Jiyu's thoughts, Hua Qingqing continued, everything that occurred in 6 Desires Heaven caused a great disturbance. It may have already spread across the entire Western world. Here at Great Brahma Heaven, we have also heard a lot of chatter about that battle. Hua Jiyu nodded lightly and asked, what about Zhenchan? There was some coldness in her voice. If it weren't for Saint Zhenchan, who had kept pressing without giving them a way out, Yi Futian would never have had to take that drastic step and end up like this. I don't know, Hua Qingqing said. We heard that almost everyone from Zhenchan Temple had been wiped out, but so far, it was impossible to determine whether Saint Zhenchan himself had actually died. Some reports indicated Saint Zhenchan may not yet perish, but he did not return to Zhenchan Temple either. Temporarily, he had gone missing. It is possible that even if he did not fall, he might have been severely injured. Hua Jiyu nodded. Under that devastating attack, even if Saint Zhenchan did not die from it, he would be so gravely injured that he probably used up 8 out of his 9 lives. His condition could not be much better than Yi Futian's. However, this was not enough. What she really wanted to hear was the news that Saint Zhenchan had died. We are here. It didn't take long for the group to land on an ancient peak. There, they would conceal their trail and avoid attracting unwanted attention. Let's not bother with things from the outside for now, and let him recover and rest. Let's not go out for a while either, Chen Yi proposed, and everyone agreed. Not long after they arrived in the Western world, they had already set off such a violent storm that shocked everybody within. Chapter 2459, Slumber. After the battle at 6 Desires Heaven, nearly all the top figures at Zhenchan Temple had been killed or wounded. For the time being, no one bothered chasing down Yi Futian. Previously, Zhenchan Temple wanted to apprehend Yi Futian because of the divine body of Xinjia the Great Emperor and the divine items that were in his possession. However, after that battle, everyone witnessed Yi Futian's resolution. The divine body self-destructed and exploded, turning into an endless domain world of path obliteration. The divine body was no more. Furthermore, it was pointless to continue plotting for the inheritance that Yi Futian had inherited from the great emperors. The determination that Yi Futian displayed made them realize that even if Yi Futian were to be taken, it would be difficult to force him to submit. Therefore, continuing to go after Yi Futian would get them nothing. However, Saint Zhenchan was a cultivator of Buddhism who held exceptionally high status in the Western world. If Yi Futian were to really fall into the hands of certain people, it was probably something that would not bother him much. After all, without the divine body, Yi Futian's strength would be greatly limited. He would no longer pose a threat to those who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. At the same time, This battle also introduced those in the Western world to a cultivator from Divine Prefecture. He was a white-haired genius talent who had also caused an uproar in the original realm. However, everything happening in the outside world seemed to have nothing to do with Futian at the moment. He had not yet awakened from his deep slumber. Obviously, the trauma he had suffered this time was unprecedented. Even at his current realm, and the strength of his spiritual soul could hardly bear the impact he received, so he had been in a deep sleep ever since. Time passed little by little. Although the influence of that battle remained, it was not talked about as much as time went on. However, the rush remained the same in Six Desires Heaven, as cultivators in the Western world were constantly going there. They wanted to bear witness to that domain world of path obliteration created by the self-destruction of the divine body. It had attracted the interest of everyone, especially those cultivators who were mighty and powerful. The divine body self-destructed, forming a domain space of its own. It had actually created an independent space between heaven and earth, which seemed totally incompatible with this place. Furthermore, no one dared to enter it lightly, as their power of the great path could be easily wiped out. After feeling the power within the domain of path obliteration, everyone couldn't help but think of Saint Zhenchan. In that battle, what kind of terrifying scenario did the cultivators from Zhenchan Temple experienced? According to rumors, the Lord of Zhenchan Temple, Saint Zhenchan, did not perish. The news came from Zhenchan Temple, so it should be reliable. There was no better entity to judge the well-being of Saint Zhenchan than Zhenchan Temple. However, he had not gone back to the temple either. Anyone who felt the aura of destruction in this domain understood that even if Saint Zhenchan survived, he probably did so at a great cost. He would probably not be returning to Zhenchan Temple for the foreseeable future and would do well to conceal his whereabouts. In the meantime, many cultivators had gone to Zhenchan Temple and were openly staying there, waiting. Saint Zhenchan aside, Futian was no better than the other man at the moment. Upon the ancient peak, there was a structure at the edge of the cliff. It was extremely quiet, and a beautiful goddess was sitting there silently. Behind her, a white-haired figure laid without movements or sound, but a breath of life could be detected, flowing upon his body. Even though Futian had fallen into a deep sleep, this life force seemed to automatically nourish his body and spiritual soul. Gradually, signs of life slowly appeared on Futian's face. Hua Jiyu clearly remembered that after the battle, Futian had almost fallen into a deadly slumber. Only a mysterious force maintained his weakened vitality, which was associated with Futian's superior ability in self-healing. Hua Jiyu also knew a lot about this and knew how tenacious Futian's life force could be. Therefore, although she was worried, she firmly believed that Futian would eventually get better. He could heal himself, it was only a matter of time. As time passed, in a blink of an eye, it had already been 2 years since Futian and the others arrived in the Western world. Futian had thought that this trip would not have taken them long, but he did not expect that he would still be in a coma 2 years after they arrived in the Western world, not yet ready to wake up. In the courtyard upon the ancient peak, a figure stepped forward. She glanced at the woman in front of her and the figure lying quietly there and whispered, "His aura of life has already returned to its fullness. How come he has not woken yet?" The one who was asking was Hua Qingqing. Hua Jiyu turned her head to glance at Futian. At this time, Futian was completely covered by the aura of life, and there were even currents of the great path that surrounded him. His breath of life had been completely restored, but still, he was deep in his slumber. Shaking her head gently, Hua Jiyu whispered in a low voice, "His breath of life is restored, so he should be fine. Perhaps he was still sleeping because his spiritual soul has not yet fully recovered." Ultimately, it was the power of his spiritual soul that he consumed in that battle. "Maybe it is developing in a better direction," Hua Qingqing said softly, and Hua Jiyu nodded. It was possible. Perhaps after such a tremendous consumption of his power, if Futian fully recovered, with his tenacity, he might have gotten stronger. His life spirit had always had an unimaginable resilience that was almost frightening. How about the young ones? Did they go down the mountain again? Hua Jiyu asked. The young ones she was referring to included Fang Kun and Little Ling. After settling down here for a while, The four of them would often go down the mountain and walk around the city. The influence of that battle waned, and almost no one knew about them, at least not in the great Brahma heaven where they were at. Hua Qingqing nodded. They are still so young, and it was understandable that they can't stay put like us. The trip they took down the mountain was also for the sake of experience. Wasn't that the original reason for bringing them here? Uncle Tai is with them, so nothing will happen. In this city, Uncle Tai's cultivation is sufficient to keep them safe, Hua Qingqing continued. Hua Jiyu nodded in agreement. The four youngsters treated her as their masteress, with respect. They saw her as their own elder, which she could clearly feel. Now the group was like family, and she started seeing those four little ones as her own. In fact, all four of them were in the realm of Renhuang, so nothing could really happen to them. Therefore, there was no need to worry about them wandering around. Qingqing, it's just that your business is going to be delayed again, Hua Jiyu looked at Hua Qingqing and said. This trip to the Western world was meant for Hua Qingqing, but who knew that they would encounter a series of troubles in Six Desires Heaven? They had no choice in any of them. Now that 2 years had passed, they had no idea how long it would take for them to complete the original objective of this trip. No matter. There was no telling how long my business will take, so it doesn't matter if it's not yet completed. As long as I can stay by your side, it is enough, Hua Qingqing said with a smile, and her smile seemed to put those around her at ease. Since he came to the Western world, this thing must be done, of course, Hua Jiyu responded. She looked at Yi Futian's sleeping figure and whispered, he should be waking up soon too. Chapter 2460, All Buddha's Calendar. Over the past few days, the great Brahma heaven had been inordinately lively. It seemed as if it was in anticipation of something celebratory. Lanterns were hung up by everyone in the city, and all of them had a Buddha lamp lit within the lantern, with the word Buddha engraved on the outside of the lantern. Numerous cultivators from the great Brahma heaven were also visiting places like temples on this day, and the entire great Brahma heaven was filled with a special atmosphere. Gradually, there was less and less talk about the battle that happened 2 years ago in Six Desires Heaven. It was as if another major event was about to occur, which would drown out all the rippling effects of that battle. In a tavern in the great Brahma heaven, many cultivators came and went, drinking and chatting. A group of 4 people was sitting somewhere here. These 4 were very young in age, but their temperaments were extraordinary. It was Yi Futian's 4 disciples. Fang Kun, Little Ling, Tai Tu, and Duo Yu, the 4 of them. They were very quiet at this time. They didn't speak much but were more interested in listening. They were fascinated by the things discussed by the people around them. All Buddha's Fest. Fang Kun's eyes moved around, finding this new subject somewhat interesting. He didn't expect that there would be such a festival in the Western world. And according to their understanding, All Buddha's Fest only happened once every 100 years and sometimes lasted for 100 days. It was in remembrance of the Lord of all Buddhas. Once upon a time, the Lord of all Buddhas was enlightened under the Bodhi tree and started spread his faith in the Western world. He was honored as the Lord of all Buddhas. He traveled all over the Western world to spread Buddhism's teachings and bring light to those living within the world, which contributed to the prosperity of the Western world today. To commemorate the Lord of all Buddhas, subsequently, later generations decided on an All Buddha's Fest, held once every 100 years. During All Buddha's Fest, no cultivators in the Western world were allowed to kill or even fight, as blood was forbidden. At the same time, Buddhists would be traveling to all corners of the Western world during these 100 days, preaching and imparting Buddhist doctrines and teaching people to do good. In other words, during the 100 days of All Buddha's Fest, the endless Western world would enter into a period of absolute peace and become an ideal world. It was without killing, plundering, or conquest. Otherwise, they would be dealt with by Buddhist justice. Moreover, the All Buddha's Fest this time was different from all prior times and would be even grander. This year would not only be ushering in the All Buddha's Fest, which was held once every 100 years, but also the 10,000 years on the All Buddha's calendar. In other words, the end of All Buddha's Fest would be the beginning of the 10,000th year on the All Buddha's calendar. Such scene of prosperity had hardly ever been experienced in anyone's lifetime. Precise because of this, even though the great Brahma heaven was not the center of Buddhism, the atmosphere of joy was thick in the air. Everyone was getting ready to welcome the onset of All Buddha's Fest. All Buddha's Fest is here. What about the thing that Master wanted to do? Little Ling murmured. All killing was prohibited during All Buddha's Fest, so a recurrence of something like what happened before would be absolutely forbidden. As soon as All Buddha's Fest was here, the Master could do what he wanted to do. This was an opportunity. Fang Kun thought of it as well. Although they didn't know exactly what the teacher intended to do, they had some general idea of where they needed to be. No doubt, All Buddha's Fest would be a good opportunity. But right now, the Master was still in a slumber and hadn't awakened. If he couldn't make it in time, that could be a problem. What happens if someone breaks the rules during All Buddha's Fest? Duo Yu asked. His voice was tinged with a coldness. Many people next to them looked their way when they heard him and looked at Duo Yu as if he was a total idiot. These people seemed to have no idea about the history of Buddhism. Once upon a time, a Buddha Lord above the Western Heaven violated the commandments. Later, he died in the Parinirvana, otherwise known as the Great Entrance into Perfect Rest, as a warning to future generations. That Buddha Lord, at the time, was one of the top 10 Buddha Lords in Western Heaven, a cultivator next to him said indifferently, which caused Fang Kun and the others to feel a slight concern. Duo Yu nodded slightly on the side, taking it all in. What if someone was trying to harm me, but I resisted and killed the instigator? Duo Yu continued, wanting to clarify the situation. He sensed that this All Buddha's Fest would be an opportunity for his master. If the master did not wake up, they could assist the masteress to do what the master wanted to accomplish. And, this matter seemed to have something to do with the masteress and Hua Qingqing. Not guilty, in that case the person next to him responded. Duo Yu nodded in return, thank you. He didn't ask anything anymore because now he had some basic understanding of All Buddha's Fest rules. Your temperaments are extraordinary. Conceivably, you must be from an exceptional clan. At your level of cultivation, you should have known about these things. Next to them, a fair-looking man in white played with his cup with a smile and said, So, may I ask where are you from? The rest of the people inside the tavern realized this as well. These 4 people had a superior temperament. They definitely were unusual. But the rules of All Buddha's Fest were indeed common knowledge, known to all Buddhist cultivators, even young people would have heard about it. These people didn't seem to know anything, which was very strange. Fang Kun showed alertness in his eyes when he heard the man's question. He thought that this person was pretty sharp. He smiled and replied, The 4 of us have been following our master to cultivate in solitude since we were kids. It wasn't until recently that we have been coming out a little more in the world. It was not so strange that we are unfamiliar about some of the things in the world. And he was not lying. Indeed, they had been cultivating in isolation. In Four Corner Village, they didn't know much about anything. Even the divine prefecture was a strange entity to them, never mind the Buddhist Western world. This is a coincidence then. Previously I was also cultivating with my master away from worldly disturbances and only stepped into the world not long ago myself, precisely because of the arrival of All Buddha's Fest. If you have just come to this world, you should have some understanding of the fest and not be completely ignorant of it. Moreover, you seem to be very interested in All Buddha's Fest, enough to make inquiries. Could it be that your clan is also unfamiliar with All Buddha's Fest? The man in white continued. His face was fair but with a strangely wicked attraction. He appeared to be about 30 years of age but appeared quite unfathomable. Fang Kun and his little group were a little annoyed now. This man's tone was getting to be a little too aggressive. What's it to you? Little Ling replied coldly. But Fang Kun asked instead, Our elders have not mentioned it to us. Presumably, they knew that we would be asking around and didn't think it necessary. Is there a problem with that? The man in white smiled as he took a sip of wine. But then he put down the cup and turned to face them, looking at Fang Kun's table. In an instant, a terrible golden ray gleamed from his eyes, and the light of Buddha was shining. Those eyes of his seemed to be able to see through everything. And this one glance caused the faces of the 4 youngsters to change suddenly. They sensed currents of the great path were flowing all around them, and it was a special kind of great path, their own path of cultivation. Buddha's clairvoyance. The cultivators in the tavern were astounded when they saw the sight before them. The eyes of the man in white seemed to have turned into the eyes of Buddha, capable of seeing through everything. Any cultivator would have nowhere to hide in front of those eyes. It was him. Everyone could think of only one person, and their hearts were uneasy. Chapter 2461, Aggressor. Zhu, who was a disciple from the Zhu family, one of the top principalities in Jianan City in the Great Brahma Heaven. Zhu, who had shown unparalleled talent since he was a child and was sent to the Holy Land of Buddhism to cultivate. He was the only cultivator in Jianan City to be selected by the Buddhist sect. Although he was not often seen in Jianan City, the cultivation world of Jianan City knew him very well. Now, he seemed to have returned. It must be on account of the All Buddha's Fest. All Buddha's Fest was the premier grand event in the Buddhist world. It was not surprising for Zhu Hu to come back home at this time. Indeed, Zhu Hu had completed his cultivation of the Buddha's clairvoyance, which was a most supernatural ability in the world of Buddhism. It enabled its cultivator to see through everything, including the types of cultivation practiced by the others. At this moment, Zhu Hu's heavenly eyes fixed on the four cultivators, still surrounded by the light of Buddha. Fang Kun and the other three stood up at the same time, looking at Zhu Hu, quite displeased. However, Zhu Hu didn't seem to care. He was still sitting there quietly. It seemed as if he was not aware of any of it. Natural hidden ways, Zhu Hu muttered to himself, still staring at the four of them. He continued, Jianan City is not one of the top cities in the Great Brahma Heaven for cultivation. It was not surprising that the sudden appearance of four cultivators with natural hidden ways piqued my curiosity. What clan are you from, and what is it exactly? Where are the four of you coming from? Fang Kun and the others were more than stunned. Zhu Hu's eyes were so sharp and ruthless that he saw the four of them were born with the way. They cultivated in the village and were indeed born with the hidden way. Later they received tutelage from the teacher himself in cultivation. It was true they were extraordinary, far beyond those common cultivators. It could be said that the conditions of their cultivation were unparalleled, hence Zhu Hu's realization of just how exceptional they were. Under the Buddha's clairvoyance, he could see that they had natural hidden ways about them. We have to go now, Fang Kun said coldly. As soon as his voice faded, he glanced at the other three and turned around to leave. Fang Kun was, by nature, passionate and impulsive. He was prone to mischief in the village when he was younger. Although he was of age now, his personality did not change much. However, now was not the time to do anything stupid, and the last thing he wanted was to provoke someone and cause more trouble for his master. The others understood and followed Fang Kun to leave. However, an aura of the Great Path fell directly on them, as several renhuang intercepted them in different directions and sealed the tavern shut. Zhu Hu sat there quietly. He continued to drink his cup of wine. His manner was light and breezy. Fang Kun turned to look at him and said, "We don't know each other, so there is no need to act like this." "But I am interested in the four of you," Zhu Hu responded. He stood up and walked toward the four of them. "The four of you know nothing of All Buddha's Fest, yet you were born with natural hidden ways, each with different abilities with independent elements that may not come from the same discipline. I assure you, I am quite curious about the four of you." Outside the tavern, a blind man was working his way in the direction of the tavern from a distance. It was Blind Tai, of course. But at this moment, there was another middle-aged man who emerged in front of him. This middle-aged man exuded a horrific aura as the currents of the Great Path continuously flowed all over his body. He was watching Blind Tai with extreme alarm, but his realm was about the same as his opponent, the pinnacle of Renhuang. He got in front of Blind Tai. Obviously, he was the cultivator who was secretly protecting Zhu Hu, just like Blind Tai was keeping Fang Kun and the other three youngsters out of trouble. Fang Kun and the others knew that Blind Tai had been intercepted. Clearly, the identity of this man in white was more than meets the eye. "What do you want to do?" Fang Kun turned his head and asked the man in white. "I don't want to do anything. It is purely out of curiosity that I want to see who you are and where you come from. The man in white stood up, inspecting the four with those heavenly eyes. An invisible storm of the great path blew up in the tavern. Instantly, everything in the tavern was shattered into nothingness. The cultivators inside evacuated quickly to get out of their way. Soon, the only ones left were the man in white and the cultivators behind him, as well as Fang Kun and his companions. Fang Kun and the others had a displeased look on their faces. Just for pure curiosity? This didn't make any sense. With the onset of all Buddha's fest, the world of Buddhism would usher in a period of absolute peace. Even those cultivators with long-standing grievances would not be able to act for quite a while. Therefore, right before all Buddha's fest, the world of Buddhism would often experience a period of chaos, with many people hasten to resolve disputes or to act capriciously. Once all Buddha's fest arrived, there would be a long period of time for things to settle down. As for Zhu Hu, he was beyond certain that these four were no cultivators from Jianan City. It was rare to see four great cultivators who were born with the natural hidden way. It was natural for him to want to take a closer look. When Buddha's clairvoyance was released, his eyes suddenly became more petrifying. He seemed to see through everything, and once again, his eyes were directed at the four of them. When these eyes locked onto theirs, Fang Kun and his companions felt a prickly pain in their own eyes, as if the heavenly eyes had pierced their eyes, to penetrate their consciousnesses to spy on their cultivation. Boom! The four exploded with the power of the great path at the same time. Their bodies levitated into the air with force. Zhu, who was too audacious, blatantly spying on them without reservation. Naturally, they could not sit here and waiting for him to pick them off. I saw divine methods. You have the inheritance of the great emperor hidden on you. Zhu Hu's eyes were particularly frightening. Just now, he seemed to have seen some imageries in his mind, and just as he had thought, these four youths had unusual origins. At this moment, Zhu Hu's eyes were growing solemn. His body slowly elevated into the air, and his white robes fluttered as his eyes fixed on the four. Divine light radiated out of those terrifying eyes again, looking at Fang Kun and his companions. Boom! At this time, in the distant space, a great war suddenly erupted. It was Blind Tai who acted. Although he couldn't see, he couldn't be more clear about everything that was happening around him. Zhu, whose realm was considerable, he was a cultivator in the realm of Middle Renhuang. Fang Kun and the others wouldn't be able to counter him effectively. More importantly, the ability that Zhu Hu cultivate was dangerous and mystifying. He possessed the Buddhist method of Buddha's clairvoyance, so he could spy on everything and enter their consciousnesses. If he was allowed to succeed, it would be too detrimental to the four youngsters and may have an unfortunate effect on their future cultivation. However, the strength of the cultivator who blocked Blind Tai's attack was also menacingly tyrannical. He was a cultivator from Zhu Hu's clan, an expert in many Buddhist methods, with amazing defensive power. He was able to intercept Blind Tai's attack outright so that Blind Tai was unable to break through his defense to help Fang Kun and the others. Zhu Hu did not look over there. He was suspended in midair, continued to regard at the four. A pair of gigantic eyes suddenly appeared in the void, shutting down this corner of the sky immediately, and turning it into a world of pupil, just as if the world now was the heavenly eye itself. These gigantic eyes that appeared in the void looked at Fang Kun and his group. Suddenly, the auras of the great path upon the four of them were completely exposed. Elusive currents of the great path now turned into shadows and were revealed. A miniature world appeared around Fang Kun, doors of space appeared around Little Ling. A divine shadow holding a divine hammer stood behind Tai Tu, and a pair of horrific eyes of reincarnation appeared behind Duo Yu. Chapter 2462, Waking Up. Zhu Hu had a satisfying look in his eyes when he saw the images before him. He said in a low voice, "It's truly incredible. Tell me now who's your master and where you are from." Buzz. Fang Kun's figure was gone in a flicker. Spatial divine lights appeared in the void, approaching Zhu Hu with all due speed. However, even those spatial lights, nearly invisible, could not escape the heavenly eyes, which saw everything with ultra-clarity. Fang Kun's every movement seemed to be magnified and in slow motion. None of them had escaped Zhu Hu's awareness. Zhu Hu raised his hand, and a massive golden Buddhist palm seal blasted out, passing through those spatial divine lights. It landed on Fang Kun with precision. A deafening bang was heard as the attack came through in front of Fang Kun. The palm seal penetrated the protective shield around Fang Kun, seeping inside the miniature world. It then slammed on Fang Kun directly. The momentum knocked Fang Kun back a few steps. The light was shining brightly in the space. Fang Kun returned directly to the place he was before. He made a muffled groan. Blood was dripping from the corners of his mouth, and his face was slightly pale. The power of space seemed to be completely futile under the heavenly eyes, as nothing could be hidden. More importantly, their opponent had the advantage of a much higher realm, a gap that was impossible to rectify. It was simply inconceivable for Fang Kun to get any closer and injure his opponent under these circumstances. As a result, he was repelled readily enough by a single blow. Zhu Hu's gaze fell on Fang Kun, and a hint of excitement flashed across his eyes. Those born with the natural hidden ways are truly full of surprises. The body is the body of the Great Path, indescribably elusive. It was difficult to capture were it not for the Buddha's clairvoyance. He was fascinated by the abilities of these people. Duo Yu took a step forward. Those eyes of his were extremely frightening. These were the eyes of reincarnation. Zhu Hu seemed to detect it quickly though. Under the Buddha's clairvoyance, those massive eyes in the void fixed on Duo Yu, looking through the illusions he was creating. Unfortunately, hallucinations and the eye of reincarnation are quite useless here. Zhu Hu's eyes were strange and wicked-looking. If the young man in front of him possessed equal cultivation as him, perhaps the eye of reincarnation could be of threat to him, but the gap was simply too great to pose any threat. Duo Yu felt a sharp pain in his eyes. As he disengaged the eye of reincarnation, he shut both eyes tightly. Little Ling and Tai Tu still attempted to make a move, but Fang Kun held them back with his hand. He looked at Zhu Hu and said, "Why are you so unrelenting?" But Zhu Hu didn't much care about Fang Kun's objection nor his inquiry, for that matter. His body was suspended in the sky, surveying the land below, as that pair of heavenly eyes still floated in midair. They turned this space into eye sorcery zone. "If you refuse to provide an explanation yourself, you leave me no choice," said Zhu Hu. He then stretched out his hand and grabbed at Fang Kun and the other three. A massive and boundless Buddhist palm seal smashed down at them, grabbed towards Little Ling first. Doors of space appeared all around Little Ling. She walked into one as her figure disappeared right where she was, but none of this escaped the heavenly eyes floating above them. A gigantic palm seal cupped in another direction, and just as Little Ling was walking out of another door of space, she walked right into the palm. It grabbed her and took her high up into the sky. Little Ling. The expression of the other three changed quickly to panic. Tai Tu was on the move first. But then a terrifying divine shadow appeared behind him, holding the divine hammer of the protector and blasting it down, rocking this corner of the sky. A terrifying boom sound came out as the divine hammer of the protector sought to destroy this space and take aim at Zhu Hu. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," Zhu Hu remarked with much contempt. Likewise, a boundless and humongous figure also appeared behind him. An ancient Buddha in white, who now raised his hand to blast out a golden palm seal, smashed right on the hammer that was falling on him. The rumbling sound of pure trepidation came out as the space was shaking in its aftershocks. The divine hammer of the protector failed to do anything to the giant palm seal from the ancient Buddha in white. "Go!" Zhu Hu spat forcefully, and suddenly there was a violent roar in the void. Many gigantic palm seals were now blasting out like endless waves of a tsunami. They overwhelmed the void, knocked the hammer back, then slammed right on Tai Tu with decided ferocity. As Tai Tu's body flew back with fierce backward momentum, he spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. Fang Kun and Duo Yu also released their expertise in successive attacks, but Zhu Hu took absolutely no notice. With a wave of his hand, thousands of Buddhist palm seals blasted out, sheltering the sky and cleared out all the space. In a blink of an eye, all three of them were injured in that powerful attack and forced to retreat. Faced with absolute realm advantage, Fang Kun and his companions had no way of asserting the true scope of their strengths. Whether they were born with natural hidden ways, cultivated in divine methods, or instructed by deities, none made any difference. The gap between their realms was irreparable. In this great path domain, fierce roars of battle cries could be heard as the battles raged on. Blind Tai desperately fought to gain any grounds forward, wanting to break through the defense that was hampering him so that he could render support to those youngsters. His divine consciousness penetrated the great path domain formed by the heavenly eyes and scanned inside. It was as if he could see everything that was happening. Ey. At this moment, a long, sustained whistle was heard. It was the sound uttered by some demonic beast. Blind Tai's divine consciousness went to that side and perceived the golden divine light that broke through the clouds and mist in the sky behind them. It was the golden-winged roc, and several figures were riding on the back of the roc. The man in the lead was clad in pure white with white hair, unparalleled beyond words. Sensing this, Blind Tai retracted much of his aura. Finally, he woke up. Now that he was here, the situation at hand would be resolved in no time. The golden-winged roc swooped down as a golden light broke through the space, aiming directly at that area of the great path. With a loud bang, that area of the great path was penetrated through and split wide open, suddenly exposing the battlefield within. Zhu Hu muffled a groan as his body was repelled back involuntarily. The expression on his face changed slightly as he looked at the huge divine bird that appeared and the figures that were standing on the back of the divine bird. Master! Fang Kun and Tai Chu's eyes lit up when they saw the figure on the back of the divine bird. Their master had finally woken up from his slumber and come to their rescue just in time. Master! Zhu Hu looked at the figure on the back of the divine bird, frowning slightly, and a touch of coldness instantly flashed through his eyes. A cultivator walked out from behind him and got in front of Zhu Hu, who still had little Ling in his clutches. He was worried that the other party would suddenly unleash fatal attacks on Zhu Hu. Buzz! A light suddenly lit up on the back of the divine bird, and bright light instantly illuminated all over this space. Many had to close their eyes immediately because the light was so blinding that they could see nothing but the light. Under this light, there was a sound that came out, and Zhu Hu's expression suddenly changed. When the light disappeared, the humongous palm seal was shattered and fell from the sky, and the figure that he was holding had been brought back to the back of the divine bird already. The method of light. There was slight disbelief in Zhu Hu's eyes. These cultivators were far too mysterious. The four youngsters were all born with a natural hidden way, and now there was someone who was an expert at the method of light. Who were these people? And where did they come from? Thank you, Uncle Chen. Little Ling looked at the people on the rock and whispered, Master, Masteress. As she was speaking, she kept her head bowed slightly as if she had done something wrong. She had caused this trouble for the master. Little Ling, are you okay? Yi Futian said softly, with some indulgence. Little Ling shook her head, and when Yi Futian saw her reaction, he knew what she was worried about. As long as you are okay. Yi Futian smiled and rubbed her head. He then turned his attention to Zhu Hu as his eyes fell on him. Zhu Hu's heart shuddered when he saw those eyes, as he immediately sensed a strong danger lurking. Chapter 2463, The Slaughter. A middle Ren Huang. Yi Futian glanced at Zhu Hu and said, And you think you are pretty strong, don't you? A cultivator in the realm of middle Ren Huang bullying four young cultivators with lower realms. Zhu Hu looked at Yi Futian and bowed slightly, saying, I am Zhu Hu of the Zhu family in Jianan City, a disciple of Buddhism. In the Western world of Buddhism, those who claimed to be disciples of Buddhism were widely believed to be the cultivators of Orthodox Buddhism. Zhu Hu obviously thought of himself as orthodoxy. He was trying to remind Yi Futian of his status as such and warning him not to act emotionally or lightly. He could feel a sense of danger exuding from Yi Futian, Chen Yi, and the others. But Yi Futian seemed not to have heard it. He raised his hand and grabbed across the void. The aura of the great path whizzed out from those in front of Zhu Hu and rushed towards Yi Futian. However, Chen Yi took a step forward, and suddenly rays of light radiated outward, immediately extinguished their power of the great path. Boom! Yi Futian's giant palm seal slammed down and took hold of Zhu Hu's body, picking him up. It was exactly what he did to little Ling before. Zhu, whose body roared with the power of the Great Path, struggling to get free as he tried to rid of the giant palm seal. However, his power was no match to that of Yi Futian's. The power gap between them was even greater than the gap between little Ling and Zhu Hu. There was simply no way for him to break free. In the distance, the cultivator of the ninth realm, who had tangled up Blind Tai, now tried his best to get himself off the battlefield to support the others. But just at this moment, Blind Tai, holding the divine hammer of the protector and smashing it down. Instantly the earth cracked, and the sky howled, suppressing this corner of the sky entirely, not giving him a chance to extricate himself. It was just as what he had done before. It was a rather appropriate response. I am a disciple of Buddhism. Zhu, who was struggling as he appealed to Yi Futian once more. All the surrounding figures came forward, and all of them were Renhuang cultivators. One of them said, "We from the Zhu family of Jianan City. May we ask for your name, sir?" However, Yi Futian didn't seem to have heard any of those voices. He continued to focus on Zhu Hu and asked, "Fang Kun, what was he doing to you guys before?" "Master, we were just asking about the All Buddhas Fest when he spied on us using the Buddha's clairvoyance. He then claimed that the four of us were unusual when he tried to control our movements, wanting to spy on the secrets of our cultivation," Fang Kun replied. Yi Futian immediately understood all of it in his heart. He glanced at Zhu Hu, a hint of murderous intent flashed through his eyes. Buddha's clairvoyance? Spying on the secret of their cultivation? For cultivators, the secret of cultivation was not something they would divulge voluntarily. If the others wanted to pry, spy, or possess, the only way was to gain control over the four of them, which would inevitably destroy the four of them as well. Therefore, it could be said that Zhu, who had never intended to be merciful to these four youngsters for this alone, he ought to die. Buddha's clairvoyance is a secret method not taught in Buddhism. I can see that they are extraordinary, so I inquired about their cultivation, that's all. There were no other intentions. Why turn such trivial matter into a major contention? Zhu, who was still struggling, but his body did not move an inch. A trivial matter? Yi Futian glanced at Zhu Hu indifferently and said, "Then I guess killing you is just a trivial matter as well." Zhu Hu was taken aback when he heard Yi Futian's reply. Then, he felt the hand that gripped him was increasing its pressure, and his face suddenly paled. Would this man dare to kill him? "Sir, he is an orthodox descendant of Buddhism," said a cultivator from the Zhu family. "Buddhism is known for doing good deeds in the world. He is not worthy of being an orthodox Buddhist disciple. If Buddha knew all the things he had done here today, I'm sure Buddha would want to take out this garbage himself," Yi Futian concluded with indifference. He then applied some more pressure on that outstretched hand of his. An air of death enveloped Zhu Hu now, and his face changed to one of total panic. The face of this handsome man in white was distorted and twisted at the moment. He shouted, "How dare you!" Bang! As soon as Zhu Hu's voice faded, another voice was heard. The giant palm seal clenched tight as fresh blood pouring out of it. Horrific will of the way permeated Zhu Hu's body and the spiritual soul was erased. "Die! Didn't he dare? Now there is one less of you," Yi Futian murmured. Since coming to the Western world of Buddhism, he had felt nothing but malice. Therefore, it could be said that Yi Futian was in a real bad mood. He had just woken from a deep sleep, and the first thing he saw was Zhu Hu bullying his disciples. Yi Futian's current mood was not difficult to imagine. Zhu Hu aside, he had already slaughtered quite a few cultivators who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. Even several Lord-level characters had perished because of him. Indeed, garbage like Zhu Hu would not be missed. Disciple of Buddhism? Even someone like Saint Zhenchan was still status unknown and missing in action. Would Yi Futian care about his status as a Buddhist disciple? Crush and obliterate was the only answer. In the ground below, the cultivators of Jianan City felt their blood ran clod when they witnessed the sight before them. Did he just squish Zhu Hu to death? Zhu Hu, an enchanting genius talent from Jianan City, was squished to death by Yi Futian like some insect. Perhaps even Zhu Hu himself would never have dreamed that he would die this way. If he could, he would have never provoked Fang Kun and the others. Because of a conflict that he instigated, it led to his own immediate death. It was a turn of events that was all too unimaginably cruel. The cultivators from the Zhu family were also stunned motionless and watched Yi Futian simply squashed Zhu Hu to death. No one could anticipate that Yi Futian would be so decisive and overbearing as to crush Zhu Hu to death without another word. They didn't even have the time to react when they saw the end of Zhu Hu. Boom, boom. A horrific atmosphere was released. All the cultivators from the Zhu family were furious when they saw Zhu Hu being slaughtered. Several top Renhuang and many upper Renhuang released their power of the Great Path at the same time, covering the sky and sheltering the sun as a frightening coercion descended from the firmament. You killed my son. You must now die. A middle-aged Renhuang in the void roared furiously. It was Zhu Hu's father, who was a cultivator of peak Renhuang. Yi Futian surveyed the crowd, his eyes cold and indifferently. His face, expressionless. It's always the father's fault when the son is undisciplined. Yi Futian spat out his verdict in a cold voice when he saw the man coming at him. He then raised his hand to the sky, and instantly, a divine sword penetrated through the space, regardless of the distance. The streamer of swordsmanship pierced the great path and tore through the void. The body of Zhu Hu's father, who was in mid-descend, gave a violent tremble. Then, he stopped in the void as a light put a hole through his body. He looked down and saw a sword ray appeared on his own chest. Suddenly, intense fear was written all over his face. No, he let out a great howl, and then his body, too, exploded and pulverized into millions of particles, turning into nothingness as he perished. Previously, when Zhu Hu was bullying Xiao Ling and the others, no one seemed to bother to step in and stop it. From the perspective of the Zhu family, it must have seemed like a matter of course for no one to interfere. That being the case, for them to try to interfere now, they deserved to die. Chen Yi took a step forward. In an instant, countless rays of light appeared on his body as absolute light shrouded the boundless space, blinding everyone's eyes. For a time, this world seemed to have turned into a world of light. The light drowned out everything, including those cultivators. Those cultivators from the Zhu family who were attacking them were pierced through and through under the light. Their bodies turned into countless spots of light as their ghostly faces appeared in the void, faces that were frozen with great fear. Chapter 2464, To Western Heaven. Dead. When the light dissipated, all the cultivators who attacked Yi Futian and his people perished and were overwhelmed by the light. It was as if they had all been purified by the light. Yi Futian and his people were so terrifyingly powerful that Renhuang simply posed no threat to them. They were in such an invincible position that continuing to fight them was unthinkable. The Zhu family had borne the brunt of this catastrophe. In this city, the Zhu family was almost standing at the pinnacle of all the familial principalities. As Zhu, who was also a cultivator of Buddhism and had acquired special Buddhism methods, this gave the Zhu family the semblance of the premier family in Jianan. Considering his background, it was not hard to understand that Zhu Hu was accustomed to behaving carelessly and with imprudence. When he saw the four young unusual Renhuang within his reach, it was natural that it piqued his curiosity. And when he realized they were cultivators with natural hidden ways, his desire to get to the bottom of it was even stronger. He could never foresee the catastrophe caused by the pursuit of his unwise curiosity. No one could have known Zhu Hu's final thoughts before he died. He died so quickly that as soon as his voice faded, he had already been obliterated. Insolent creatures! A voice came from afar, reverberating as if from a giant bell. It fell from the sky like the voice of a heavenly deity. High above the sky, rays of terrifying divine lights spilt as a group of cultivators appeared above the void. Everyone raised their heads to look at the sky, and when they saw these exceptional figures, their hearts trembled. This was a cultivator from the Great Brahma Heavenly Palace, the peak power of the Great Brahma Heaven. Zhu Hu was a candidate chosen by the Great Brahma Heavenly Palace to cultivate Buddhism. Therefore his return was accompanied by several cultivators from the Great Brahma Heaven. They could never imagine the manner of death in which Zhu Hu was slaughtered here. Yi Futian raised his head and glanced at those cultivators in the void. His expression was one of cold indifference. A scanning by his divine consciousness had already revealed to him the cultivation of these cultivators. No one here had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path, therefore, they posed absolutely no threat. Ultimately, this was just a city inside of Great Brahma Heaven. Although the Western world was powerful, its overall power was perhaps only comparable to the divine prefecture and not much stronger. In the city of Great Brahma Heaven, the most powerful person was probably a peak-level Renhuang. Someone who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path could probably only be found in the main city of Great Brahma Heaven. Who are you? And why are you slaughtering these people here? The cultivators from Great Brahma Heaven looked down at the ground below, his eyes cold. You didn't bother to intervene before, so don't bother intervening now, Yi Futian replied casually. He was not in the least bit perturbed. Jianan City is part of the territory ruled by our Great Brahma Heavenly Palace. What matters can't we choose to intervene in within all of Great Brahma Heaven? The cultivators in the lead responded coldly and aggressively. Is that so? Yi Futian revealed a hint of contempt and said, in that case, do you want to try to intervene? The eyes of the lead cultivator from Great Brahma Heaven sharpened when he regarded Yi Futian. He thought him insufferably arrogant. Someone dared to be so impertinent in the Great Brahma Heaven. White clothing and white hair. Cultivation is Renhuang of the 8th realm, a cultivator from the Great Brahma Heaven whispered, surprising all the others within earshot. 2 years ago, a massive storm had erupted in Six Desires Heaven that swept through the Western world. All the top principalities had heard about it. Several Lord-level figures had perished then. Saint Xunchan was still missing to this day. Xunchan Temple had almost collapsed completely because of it. A world of path obliteration had come into being in Six Desires Heaven due to that uproar. And the main player of that storm was rumored to be a handsome young man in white with white hair, a Renhuang of the 8th realm. And the young man in front of them, there was a sudden change in their eyes, as they now assessed Yi Futian seriously and with caution. Gradually, the momentum that they were carrying disappeared without the arrogant dominance that they had before. Was it really him? And he didn't die in that conflict. If it was really the main player of that conflict, given that he had already slaughtered several Lord-level figures with Saint Xunchan remained missing because of him, how could a Buddhist disciple like Zhu who mean anything to him? Would he care about killing a few more cultivators from Great Brahma Heaven? Perhaps there was nothing he wouldn't dare do. Yi Futian heard the whispers from those people and saw in their eyes that they had already recognized who he was. This was no longer a place for him to dawdle. Anyone who follows us will be summarily executed without exception, Yi Futian warned them, then turned around to leave with the golden-winged roc underneath him. The golden-winged roc spread its wings, wide enough to shelter the sky and the sun, taking Yi Futian and the others across the void as they were leaving. In a blink of an eye, they had disappeared into the clouds, and their aura gradually dissipated. No one was chasing after them. After they caught on to Yi Futian's true identity, these people from Great Brahma Heaven dared not make any reckless moves. After all, what Yi Futian did in Six Desires Heaven was too unbelievably shocking. What's going on? Those who were around him did not yet understand the scope of what had just happened. However, the people of Great Brahma Heaven just watched them leave. No one dared to pursue them on account of Yi Futian's final warning. It's him. 2 years ago, he came from Divine Prefecture, caused a great uproar in Six Desires Heaven, and Lord Six Desires died because of him. Saint Xunchan is still missing to this day, someone said. This immediately caused lots of chatter. Was it really him? If this was true, then Zhu, who was really unlucky, his provocation had attracted unwanted attention from a major Terminator. No wonder he felt those 4 young people were so extraordinary. They were all disciples of Yi Futian. Was Yi Futian really a genius talent as they had purported? However, it was said that he had lost the divine body of Shunjia the Great Emperor, so he would no longer battle with the aid of the divine body. This would inevitably weaken his battle effectiveness considerably. Even so, the people of Great Brahma Heaven were still in shock, and no one dared to challenge him. After Yi Futian left, he didn't think about how others thought of him. Above the void, the golden-winged roc soared between the clouds and the mist, traveling with incredible speed. Although there was still not a peep from Saint Xunchan, and no one chased them, the revelation of his true identity still had its inherent danger. Leaving this place as soon as possible was the wise thing to do. It went without saying that he would not be returning to the ancient peak where he resided previously. "Master, I heard them talking in the city before. The All Buddha's Fest is fast approaching, and this holiday will last for 100 days, Fang Kun said to Yi Futian. And didn't the master have some things that needed to be done? The All Buddha's Fest is a good opportunity. Xiao Ling nodded beside him. Yi Futian nodded slightly and replied, I already know. From the memory of Mo Yunzi, the golden-winged rock, he knew that after waking up from this injury, he would come very close to the onset of All Buddha's Fest in the Western world of Buddhism. This, to him, was indeed a great opportunity. During All Buddha's Fest, the Western world would be in a period of absolute peace, which would allow him to do what needed to be done. To Western heaven. Yi Futian stood on the back of the golden-winged rock, his white hair flying in the wind. He gave the order to the rock beneath him. The golden-winged rock let out a long cry as if replying to Yi Futian. Then its speed increased as it moved along in the direction of Western heaven. Western heaven was the supreme land of Buddhism, located at the highest point in the world of Buddhism. Yi Futian glanced at Hua Qingqing, who was next to Hua Jiyu. On this trip to Western heaven, no one knew what was held for any of them. As to Hua Qingqing, what would fate hold for her? They had two goals for coming to the Western world. One was for trial, and the other was to send Hua Qingqing to Western heaven. And now, they were finally heading towards their destination. Chapter 2465, The Monk in White. As the All Buddha's Fest in the world of Buddhism was fast approaching, cultivators from all sides had embarked to the Western heaven. However, the journey to the Western heaven was long and arduous. Even the place closest to the Western heaven had to cross a golden sea of clouds covered by the light of Buddha first before reaching the Western heaven. Therefore, it was impossible for anyone not a Renhuang to get there unless they were led by special cultivators. At this time, in the golden sea of clouds on the way to the Western heaven, a golden-winged rock was flying through the golden clouds and mist, but not very fast. It was not because the rock was deliberately slowing down, but that this golden sea of clouds was extremely dense under the light of Buddha, so that even at its realm, traveling forward was a somewhat laborious task for the rock. Yi Futian and the others stood on top of the rock, admiring this sea of clouds. Above the golden sea of clouds, a peaceful glow exuded a sense of tranquility and comfort. However, under this magnificent beauty before them, as they bathed in this endless light of Buddha, it was not an easy task to travel through this sea of clouds. This golden-winged rock was at the peak realm of the Demon Emperor, but it still required some time for the rock to get through this sea of clouds. More importantly, to break through the clouds and the mists, the support of the realm was required. Anyone below the realm of Upper Renhuang did not have much chance of achieving that. Further away, they could see other cultivators on their way as well, just like them, traveling through the sea of clouds and heading toward the Western heaven. The Western heaven was the true sacred land of Buddhism. When the All Buddha's Fest was near, the Western heaven would be the place with the most festive atmosphere. It was said that many Buddhas in the Western world had already left their cultivation courts on the mountains and rushed towards the Western heaven. Finally, the day before the start of All Buddha's Fest, Yi Futian and the others traversed the golden sea of clouds, broke through the clouds and mists, and arriving at the world of Western heaven. Without the heaviness of the golden clouds, the golden-winged rock could whiz along like golden lightning. It sped up to its heart's content. It seemed that the rock had felt quite oppressed when it was unable to exert its full speed previously, and now it had found a release. It's spectacular. Fang Kun looked down and said, Is this the Western heaven? The place below, at first glance, was full of ancient Buddhist architecture. The entire world was bathed in the light of Buddha. There was peace and quiet even in the midst of all the hustle and bustle. It gave those who looked upon them a sense of total tranquility. It's the Western heaven, the golden-winged rock uttered in a human voice, and its golden eyes looked down. This was also the first time that it came to the Western heaven. It was once the mount of Great Elder of the Demon Cloud clan, cultivated in Six Desires Heaven, and had never been to this holy land of Buddhism. The great elder of the demon cloud clan came here once by himself but didn't take the rock along. Not only below, but it's the same in the sky. Little Ling looked into the distance of the void. Under the peaceful and auspicious light of Buddha, many figures were traveling through the air. Many sacred beasts of the Buddhist world were the mounts of great Buddhas, such as divine elephants, Daiting, and more. Many other types of Buddha could be seen as well. They were surrounded by the light of Buddha, and with what seemed to be halo upon halo of Buddhism around their heads, which was extremely eye-catching. Here, it truly felt as if they had stepped into the world of Buddhism, where great mighty Buddhas were everywhere. But this was to be expected. With the arrival of the All Buddhas Fest, cultivators who believed in the power of Buddhism would be the majority of the attendees. Furthermore, most of the top forces in the Western world were also Buddhist principalities. All of the Western world gathered together in the Western Heaven, which accounted for the grand occasion in front of them. In the peaceful Western Heaven, it seemed like a place outside of the world of earthly concerns. It was as if there could be no battles or strife here. All of them were cultivators who were dedicated to the cultivation of Buddhism. It is rumored that everything is open on the sacred land of the Western Heaven. Whether it was a place to stay or a place of meditation in ancient temples, they are all unattended. Even Buddhist scriptures in many ancient temples could be perused freely and at will, without restriction. Anyone who comes to the Western Heaven can read them if they'd like, the golden-winged roc continued. Although he was greedy, uninhibited, and power-hungry by nature, he was awed by this Buddhist sacred land and had always yearned for it. No matter who came to this land, they would be the same as him. Everyone was curious when they heard his words. Chen Yi asked, "What if someone takes it away or destroys it?" In the sacred land of Buddhism, everything is in the eyes of the Buddha. No matter what you do on this sacred land, you cannot escape the scrutiny of the Buddha, and you will receive due punishment, the roc continued, his voice tinged with some sense of holiness. Someone as unbridled as he, when he arrived in the sacred land of the Western Heaven, could feel nothing but awe. "Go down and let's take a walk," said Yi Futian. Suddenly, the golden-winged roc swooped down and descending to the ground below. He then turned into his human form, and the group of them alighted on the ground. The cultivators around them just took a casual glance. It was not surprising to see people at this caliber of cultivation. This land was filled with them everywhere. All the top figures of the entire Western world were gathered in this sacred land of Western Heaven. Yi Futian and the others walked on this sacred land and watched many cultivators coming and going. There were top cultivators everywhere, and many of them were truly astonishing. Yi Futian stopped in front of a building. It seemed to be a tea house, effused with the scents of sandalwood, and the word Zen was engraved on it. "Let's go inside and sit," Yi Futian said as they approached the tea house. They found a place inside to sit, and immediately some monk came up to them and served them tea. After the monk finished pouring tea for them, he bowed to Yi Futian, with his hands clasped together. He then backed away without making a sound. Yi Futian nodded in return as an acknowledgement. He looked at Mo Yunzi and asked, "It seems like it is just as you said, every place in the Buddhist sacred land is open. But who is this monk? Why would a monk be willing to serve tea in a tea house? And this monk's cultivation was considerable." "It is probably some cultivation," replied Mo Yunzi. "Maybe," Yi Futian nodded. What Buddhists considered to be cultivational methods were different from others and varied in types, as everywhere was a place for potential cultivation, with all manners of methods. There were ascetic monks who walked around the world day and night, observing the varieties of life as cultivation. There were monks who concentrated on doing good deeds in the world, which was also considered cultivation. Some listened to rain and observed nature deep inside mountains and forests, which was also a cultivation of sorts. Yi Futian glanced around inside the tea house. There were cultivators from various places, and their cultivation was all quite high, but most of them were not Buddhist cultivators. They seemed to be talking about the All Buddhas Fest. Yi Futian picked up the teacup and took a sip. A refreshing sensation penetrated his body, which had a calming and soothing effect. It seemed that this tea was no ordinary tea either. Outside the tea house, on the street, a monk dressed in white was walking along the street. He made no sounds when he walked, as he was barefooted, but there was not a trace of dust or dirt on his feet. It was not just his feet, however. His white garment, likewise, was without the slightest trace of dirt. This was a monk. He had no hair, and he raised his right hand perpendicular to his chest as he walked. His eyes were closed even as he walked. But it could be seen from his face that he was quite handsome. Quite a few people glanced at the monk. This monk exuded a very particular feeling, and he was pleasant to behold. The monk stepped into the tea house, still without making the slightest sound. It was not until he was already in front of Yi Futian and the others that Yi Futian and his party noticed the monk's existence. "Grandmaster, is there something we can do for you?" Yi Futian asked with a smile. "Layman Yi." The monk opened his eyes, and those eyes were as bright as the stars, pure and clear, but at the same time, seemed bottomless. "Do we know each other, Grandmaster?" Yi Futian was a little taken back and a little surprised. He could not see through this monk's cultivational realm, and there was no aura whatsoever from his entire body. But obviously, this man was no ordinary monk either. Layman Yi came from the divine prefecture and caused quite the stir in Six Desires Heaven. How can a little monk, like myself, not have heard of it? The monk smiled and replied, which immediately alarmed Yi Futian. He had just gotten here, and he was already made by someone he didn't know. Was this a coincidence? Chapter 2466, Destiny with Buddhism. Other cultivators in the tea house now focused on Yi Futian, and all of them were taken aback. Yi Futian, who had caused an uproar in Six Desires Heaven? Anyone who could get to the Western Heaven had to be exceptional. They had all heard about that major disturbance, but they didn't expect to see him here at the Western Heaven. Remember, Yi Futian almost wiped out Zhenchan Temple entirely and single-handedly. Saint Zhenchan was a pillar of Buddhism, and to this day, his whereabouts are unknown. How dare Yi Futian show his face in the Western Heaven? Western Heaven was the holy land of Buddhism. All Buddha's fest. When everyone thought of this, they understood the reason which led Yi Futian here at the beginning of all Buddha's fest. There would be no killing or strife in the entire Western world during all Buddha's fest, let alone the holy land of the Western Heaven. Everything that happened in the holy land of the Western Heaven could not escape the eyes of the Buddha. As for this monk in white, who had appeared out of nowhere, he must have some backstory. Who could he be? Yi Futian was also considering this when he looked at the monk and asked, "I have just arrived and found a place to stay not long ago. How does the Grandmaster know that I am here? I don't believe we have met before. I am ashamed to admit that my cultivation level is relatively shallow. I only heard of your arrival after you are already here on the sacred land of the Western Heaven. However, my teacher had known for some time now that Layman Yi would come here," this monk replied, his hands clasped in front of him, speaking in a calm voice, which put his listeners at ease right away. But when Yi Futian heard this, his heart palpitated. They had sensed his coming as soon as he set foot on the sacred soil of the Western Heaven, and his master had known even before his arrival. The superpowers of Buddhism, thought Mo Yunzi, the golden-winged rock, and Yi Futian immediately received the thought. His heart trembled slightly. The other cultivators in the tea house had the same sudden realization as well, and their expressions changed. As they looked at the monk in white, someone said, "Clairaudience." Clairaudience and clairvoyance were both part of the 6 superpowers of Buddhism. Zhu Hu, the cultivator who was killed by Yi Futian in Great Brahma Heaven, was a disciple of the 6 superpowers of Buddhism. He cultivated in Buddha's clairvoyance, hence his ability to discern the cultivations of Fang Kun and the others. And the monk in front of him was an expert of clairaudience, meaning he was able to hear all the movements within the sacred land of the Western Heaven. He stated that his master knew of Yi Futian's coming to the Western Heaven long before Yi Futian actually set foot to the Western Heaven, which further demonstrated the high level of his realm. Could it be that his clairaudience had been cultivated to the point where he could hear the voices of all sentient beings in the Western world? This man's cultivation would be far higher than Zhu Hu's, Mo Yunzi said to Yi Futian via voice transmission. Zhu Hu cultivated in Buddha's clairvoyance, but he couldn't see through even a mere city like Jinan City. The man in front of him claimed that he had already heard Yi Futian when he arrived in Western Heaven. His realm had been easily deduced. His master would be Tianyin Buddha Lord, the orthodox among Buddhists and one of the topmost Buddha lords in the world of Buddhism. Mo Yunzi continued with voice transmission so that Yi Futian had some basic understanding of who he was dealing with. At this time, many people in the tea house saluted to the monk in white. The Grandmaster must be Tianyin Arhat. Arhat. Yi Futian heard this and immediately realized the status of the other man must be superior and exceptional. He was one of the Arhats. In the Western world, he must be regarded as a top-ranking figure. Little monk, I dare not presume. The monk in white made a slight bow to everyone in return. Yi Futian spoke up at this time as well. Grandmaster, please take a seat. Tianyin Arhat put his hands together in front of him and bowed to Yi Futian, and said, Little monk, thank you for your invitation. After that, he sat down, cross-legged, opposite Yi Futian, his visage solemn and authoritative. Yi Futian could even see, albeit faintly, the halo of Buddhism behind him. What advice would the Grandmaster like to impart on your visit? Yi Futian inquired with extreme courtesy. An Arhat came here for the express purpose of finding him. Clearly, it was not by some simple coincidence. There must be a reason for it. Layman Yi overestimated my visit. After knowing that Layman Yi is here, little monk was determined to come for a visit, no advice nor intent to instruct to speak of. The monk responded graciously enough. This was rather baffling to Yi Futian. Just a visit? Yi Futian asked again, a little puzzled. That's all. Tianyin Arhat responded with a smile. His eyes still hovered on Yi Futian. However, there seemed to be some curiosity in those clear and profound eyes of his. I don't understand. Would the Grandmaster please elucidate? Yi Futian implored in return deferentially. He was a little curious, too, as to why an Arhat would know of his arrival and took all the trouble to come for a visit in person. Layman Yi is a person who has a destiny with Buddhism, Tianyin Arhat continued with a smile. What do you mean? Yi Futian asked. Tianyin Arhat glanced at Hua Qingqing next to Yi Futian, pointing at her. Yi Futian looked a little surprised and asked, Did the Grandmaster detect something? Tianyin Arhat shook his head and smiled. Little monk can't see anything. I only know that Layman Yi has a destiny with Buddhism. Perhaps. Yi Futian just smiled. It seemed that he would get nowhere. Tianyin Arhat was speaking in riddles and circles, so he could not get to the bottom of anything. It's not perhaps, Tianyin Arhat said with a smile, the change between heaven and earth originates in the original realm. I wonder if Layman Yi has heard of this prophecy. Yi Futian acknowledged. He had heard of it before, of course. He said, the turmoil in the original realm attracted cultivators from all over the world, only the cultivators of the Western world of Buddhism were absent at the time. Everyone thought that it was because the world of Buddhism didn't much care about such matters, but clearly, that's not the case. The Grandmaster already knows of the prophecy. Does Layman Yi know where this prophecy first originated? Tianyin Arhat asked with a smile. Yi Futian looked a little doubtful when he heard those words. His face showed a change as he observed Tianyin Arhat closely and said, Could it be? Tianyin Arhat nodded slightly. Just as Layman Yi suspected, the earliest source of this prophecy is here in this place of Buddhist cultivation. Whose prophecy? There was some seriousness in Yi Futian's eyes now, and his heart was a bit perturbed. A prophecy had caused the changes in the original realm. The Buddhist sect did not participate, but this prediction had originated from the world of Buddhism. What was the secret hidden behind this new information? There are numerous cultivation courts upon the mountains in the world of Buddhism, with several transcendent Buddhas in residence. However, there are only one or two of them who would dare to make a bold prediction about changes taking place in the world. Tianyin Arhat continued with a smile. Does Layman Yi know that several hundreds of years ago, there was another cultivator from Divine Prefecture who had come to the sacred land of the Western Heaven? Who? Yi Futian asked. Layman Yi should be able to guess. Tianyin Arhat was still not answering him directly. Yi Futian thought about what the other man had said. Since he said that Yi Futian should be able to guess it, Then it must be someone well known with a profound connection with the Buddhist world. When his thought turned to this, Yi Futian's heart trembled a bit as he came to grips with this new epiphany. What Tianyin Ahut revealed today had already caused him several great internal turbulences. Donghuang the Great, Yi Futian said softly. Tianyin Ahut smiled without saying another word, clearly agreeing with his conclusion. Once upon a time, Donghuang the Great had come to the world of Buddhism to seek instruction and had forged a deep connection with the world of Buddhism. This was not a secret in divine prefecture. Hundreds of years ago, Donghuang the Great came to the world of Buddhism to seek instruction and cultivated. He even once sought instruction on one of the 6 superpowers in the world of Buddhism. Who knows what layman Yi will be able to reap this time around, said Tianyin Ahut. So, Donghuang the Great had cultivated one of the 6 supernatural powers? The 6 superpowers of Buddhism were clairvoyance, clairaudience, celerity, telepathy, omniscient, and elimination of outflows. Which one of the 6 superpowers did Donghuang the Great cultivate? What did Donghuang the Great cultivate? Yi Futian looked at Tianyin Ahut and asked, propelled by an unusually fervent curiosity, wanting to know what Donghuang the Great had cultivated in back when he was seeking Buddhism. As the Buddha would say, not a word. Tianyin Ahut spoke with a smile as he stood up. He clasped his hands together again, facing Yi Futian, and said, I wish layman Yi all the best on this trip. I will take my leave now. After that, he turned around to leave. It seemed as if this was really just a simple, little visit. Chapter 2467, Prying. As Yi Futian watched the silhouette of Tianyin Ahut leaving, his eyes revealed a curious look. Tianyin Ahut had actually come just to have a few words with him. It seemed as though he had no other ulterior motive. Yi Futian had also obtained a lot of information from his conversation with the other party. The changes of the world would originate from the original realm. This prophecy had actually first come from the Western Heaven, the world of Buddhism that had not joined the conflict in the original realm. According to the other party, only 1 or 2 individuals in the world of Buddhism could make such a prophecy. They should be one of the Buddha lords who stood at the top of the realm. Which Buddha lord would it be? It would certainly not be difficult to investigate. Yi Futian even suspected that it might be a Buddha lord who mastered one of the 6 Buddhist superpowers. Donghuang the Great had come to the world of Buddhism centuries ago and had sought the guidance of a Buddha lord. He had also cultivated one of these 6 superpowers. As for which one he had cultivated, Yi Futian did not know. In the divine prefecture, it was only known that Donghuang the Great had come to the world of Buddhism to seek the path. No one knew what path he had sought. All this provided much food for thought. It was worth pondering on. Tianyin Ahut's cultivation is not high, but he can already hear the various voices across the western sacred land. Having cultivated clairaudience, his master, Tianyin Buddha Lord, must be able to hear across even greater distances. What will happen when Tianyin Ahut reaches the Great Emperor Plain? Yi Futian mumbled. He might be able to hear all the voices in the Western Heaven, said Chen Yi in a low voice. It might be possible, Yi Futian nodded his head. Donghuang the Great might be able to do the same. It was just that he did not know which superpower Donghuang the Great had cultivated. Regardless of which one it was, at the Great Emperor Plain, his might would be extraordinary. It would be unparalleled. From Tianyin Ahut's tone, I suppose he bears no ill will, commented Blind Tai. Although he could not see, his senses were sharp. Tianyin Ahut claimed that his master, Tianyin Buddha Lord, had long known that Yi Futian would come to the Western Sacred Land. Tianyin Ahut paid Yi Futian a welcome visit. The other party had even taken Donghuang the Great as an example. He claimed that Donghuang the Great had also come here centuries ago. He wondered what Yi Futian would gain from coming here. If one thought about it, this was a very high evaluation of Yi Futian. Tianyin Ahut held Yi Futian in high esteem, comparing him to Donghuang the Great centuries ago. Why did Tianyin Ahut look so highly on Yi Futian? Was this related to the prophecy? In Four Corner Village, why had Master viewed Yi Futian highly to the point that he did not mind standing out on Yi Futian's behalf and allowing Four Corner Village to join the world? The more he came in contact with Yi Futian, The more blind Tai felt that Yi Futian might have come from an extraordinary background. He would have an outstanding life. Perhaps in the future, Yi Futian would come in contact with some secrets of the world. "Are you Yi Futian from the Divine Prefecture?" someone asked Yi Futian inside the tavern. The crowd had heard Tianyin Ahat and Yi Futian's conversation before this. Some of their hearts were stirred. Tianyin Ahat was an extraordinary figure. Zhu Hu, who was killed by Yi Futian, could not be compared to him. Zhu Hu was just a disciple of a Buddhist sect, yet he already had a high standing in Jianan City as a middle-level Renhuang. On the other hand, Tianyin Ahat was a Buddhist Arhat. His cultivation was unparalleled and was at the peak of the Renhuang plain. The War of Six Desires Heaven shook the entire world of Buddhism. "Brother Yi, do you know whether Saint Xunchan is alive or dead now?" someone asked. There were rumors from Xunchan Temple that Saint Xunchan had yet to perish. However, after so long, Saint Xunchan had not made an appearance. This caused many cultivators to be suspicious. "I could barely protect myself in that battle. How would I know how Saint Xunchan is?" Yi Futian replied with a smile. He indeed did not know whether Saint Xunchan was dead or alive. "Brother Yi, you stirred up quite a storm in Six Desires Heaven and even caused Saint Xunchan to go missing. I fear that your journey here to the Western Sacred Land will not be peaceful," someone said. However, Yi Futian himself had probably imagined that there would be a day like this. Hence, he had waited for all Buddha's fest to come here. Otherwise, he would certainly not have dared to act so presumptuously. Of course, it might be that Yi Futian believed no one would know about his arrival. However, Yi Futian never imagined that he would be found by Tianyin Ahat just as he set foot in the Western Sacred Land. News of his arrival had also spread. The various cultivators would certainly all know about it soon. "Thank you for the reminder," Yi Futian replied. He then got up and said, "Let's go." He also realized that many people would certainly come looking for him once news of his arrival got out. It would be difficult for him to have any peace. Although it was all Buddha's fest, and he was currently in no danger, it did not mean that no one would come to him looking for trouble. A group of people got up and walked out of the tavern. They headed outside and then flew up into the sky. The cultivators in the tavern watched as Yi Futian left. They then lowered their heads and continued enjoying their tea. The fact that Yi Futian was here was already exposed. It was impossible for him to enjoy peace. In this holy land of Buddhism, there were countless powerful figures. It was impossible for Yi Futian to keep himself hidden. Yi Futian's group rode on the back of the golden-winged giant peng bird. They looked down on the scenery of the western heaven below. The entire world was bathed in the peaceful and divine light of Buddha. It was very comfortable. Yet Yi Futian was not at ease. It was as though he was being monitored. However, when he unleashed his will, he could not sense the presence of people monitoring him. This made Yi Futian realize that the person monitoring him had higher cultivation than he had or was proficient in extraordinary superpowers. For instance, they might be proficient in one of the 6 Buddhist superpowers, Buddha's clairvoyance. This sensation persisted for a long while. Yi Futian knew that it was impossible for him to enjoy peace. He also sensed that more and more people were monitoring him. It was no longer just an individual. "If you all wish to meet me, show yourselves. Why do you need to monitor me from the shadows?" Yi Futian proclaimed loudly. His voice reverberated in the space, causing many cultivators down below to look up at him. At the same time, the figure of the golden-winged giant peng bird dove down. The group of figures landed on the ground, deciding not to continue their journey. In the distance, Yi Futian seemed to see a pair of eyes appear on the horizon. The eyes pierced the endless space and looked towards them. This ability was similar to that of Zhu Hu, whom he had killed. It must be the members of Zhu Hu's force. Tianyin Ahat knew that Yi Futian had arrived in the Western Sacred Land. Yi Futian never imagined that the Buddhist cultivation force that Zhu Hu belonged to would manage to find him so quickly as well. Besides that, figures appeared far in the distance. Some of them were monks, some weren't. All of them had extraordinary auras. Their gazes were all turned towards him. Yi Futian did not know who these people were. Right then, a figure walked over towards them from afar. This monk was extraordinary. His temperament was similar to that of Tianyin Arhat. He was very young, and it was difficult to get a read on him. His eyes even gave off a faint, enchanting vibe. Benefactor Yi, the monk greeted with his hands together as he bowed towards Yi Futian. He seemed very polite. Master, Yi Futian replied as he returned the gesture. The monk asked, I have heard much about Benefactor Yi. You are famous in the divine prefecture. You obtained a divine body, cultivated divine techniques, and obtained the inheritances of several great emperors. I am curious, how many great emperors has Benefactor Yi obtained inheritances from? Yi Futian felt somewhat strange. As to what was strange, he could not pinpoint it. In his mind, the inheritances of the great emperors that he cultivated surfaced naturally. Although he did not verbally reveal them, he naturally would think about them when asked by the other party. At that moment, Yi Futian sensed that the other party was smiling. When he saw this smile, Yi Futian felt even stranger. He felt a faint sense of discomfort. It was as though he was being pried on. This man is a practitioner of telepathy. He can read the thoughts of others. Layman Yi, do not fall for his trick, said a voice from afar. It was a transmitted thought of Tianyin Arhat. He was listening to all that was happening in the Western Sacred Land. He had heard that something was happening over here, so he reminded Yi Futian. You really enjoy meddling in the affairs of others, the strange monk said with a smile. On the other hand, Yi Futian's expression changed. No wonder he felt as though he was being pried on. It turned out that his thoughts were read by the other party. Chapter 2468, Purge Their Souls. Yi Futian's expression turned cold. When the other party asked him questions, the answers would naturally surface in his mind. He never imagined that his thoughts would be pried on. Buddha's telepathy could pry into the minds of others. The monk before him had intentionally strung him along to pry into how many great emperor inheritances he possessed. However, this was no secret in the divine prefecture. Many cultivators there knew about this. They also knew about his inheritance from Emperor Yi Qing. Yi Futian might as well not think much about it. After discovering the other party's ability, he immediately controlled what he was thinking. He merely stared at the other party and said, Master, you are an accomplished monk. It seems somewhat despicable of you to pry into the minds of others. Although his tone was calm, he was no longer as polite as before. No one would be comfortable after having their thoughts pried on like this. I was just curious, so I used telepathy to take a peek. Benefactor Yi, please pay no heed to it, the enchantingly handsome monk said as he smiled and put his hands together. I will not mention what I have seen. Benefactor Yi, you need not worry. Yi Futian's gaze was cold and indifferent. When encountering such a cultivator, who could pry into the minds of others, one had to control their thoughts all the time. This sensation was very uncomfortable. One had to be careful when coming in contact with such people. I wonder whether Saint Zhenchan is doing well, the monk continued. He was still curious. This time, Yi Futian controlled himself and did not think of the answer. He merely stared coldly and indifferently at the other party. He had already fallen for this trick once. He naturally would not be strung along by the other party anymore and have his thoughts pried on again. Right now, he only had one thought in mind, and that was how to deal with this monk. When he read this thought, the monk placed his palms together, smiled, and said, I am the disciple of Tongchan Buddha Lord. Benefactor Yi, I can understand that you are dissatisfied with me. However, in the Western heaven, your way of thinking is somewhat absurd. This monk was actually Tongchan Arhat. His standing was extremely high and was comparable to that of Tianyin Arhat. Otherwise, he would not have stepped forward to pry into the secrets of Yi Futian's mind. Right now, many of the people present were major Buddhist figures. Yi Futian knew that the other party was speaking the truth. Yet alone in the Western Sacred Land, even elsewhere, it was almost impossible for Yi Futian to do anything to Tongchan Arhat. Yi Futian shifted his gaze and looked at the other cultivators around them. Many of them came with ulterior motives. This was especially so for the cultivators in front of him from the same sect as Zhu Hu. They cultivated under Shenyang Buddha Lord. Shenyang Buddha Lord was well versed in Buddhist doctrine. He could observe the entire space and was one of the Buddha lords of the world of Buddhism. His sect was one of the more powerful ones, and the cultivators under him were also outstanding. Zhu Hu was merely one of the many exceptional cultivators under him, and he already had a high status in the great Brahma heaven. However, he was killed in Jianan City by Yi Futian. The crowd stared at Yi Futian's group. Their gazes shone with the golden light of Buddha, giving off an extraordinary vibe. They stared rudely at Yi Futian and his group. Just like Zhu Hu before, they were monitoring them without any scruples. Divine techniques, method of light, they mumbled as they looked toward Fang Kun and then at Chen Yi. When their gazes landed on Hua Qingqing, they revealed strange looks and said, "You are a Buddhist yourself. Why have you joined this person's side?" Hua Qingqing looked at the person who had spoken and said, "The spirit of Buddhism is not found in cultivation but in the heart." When they heard what Hua Qingqing said, they frowned. Yi Futian also said, "Back in Jianan City when we encountered Zhu Hu, he acted unscrupulously. When he encountered my disciple, he immediately pried into my disciple's cultivation. Seeing that he was stronger, he wanted to bully the weak and directly control my disciple. I rushed over in time and killed him. Originally, I thought that he was an outlier among the Buddhist sects. However, I never imagined that there were so many like him. It seems that I have thought too highly of all of you." Humph, a cold chide could be heard. A person said in a cold tone, "If a disciple of ours breaks his vows, he will naturally be punished according to the laws of the sect. Since when was it your place to kill a disciple of our sect?" Such an overbearing Buddhist sect, mocked Chen Yi. He then said, "Based on what you say, if a disciple of your sect tries to kill us, we can only bear with it. We cannot defend ourselves and should wait for your sect to settle the issue. However, by the way you handle things, why should we hope for you to settle things? What a joke." The other party was unmoved even after Chen Yi said this. They continued saying coldly, "After all of you killed Zhu Hu, you involved innocent people and massacred people of other clans. How dare such cruel and bloodthirsty people speak of Buddha? If it weren't all Buddha's fest now, we would have purged your souls," another monk added with a tone as cold as ice. His robe fluttered even though there was no wind blowing. The light that shot out of his eyes was extremely blinding. Yi Futian looked at the other party and said, "I have broadened my horizons by coming to the Western sacred land. A while ago, I encountered cultivators from the dark world. Although the way they acted was cruel and merciless, at least they did not act under the guise of compassion and use Buddha as an excuse. From my point of view, all of you, who practice Buddhism but bring harm to others, are worse than the cultivators from the dark world." Yi Futian had always treated others politely. However, these people were not being courteous at all and actually claimed they would purge the souls of Yi Futian's group. If that were the case, he naturally did not need to hold back. He lashed out with his words, not giving the other party any face. As expected, as soon as he finished speaking, streaks of golden light of Buddha shone and enveloped the entire space. Yi Futian could sense a faint murderous intent amidst this Buddhist aura. Even the supposedly peaceful light of Buddha became eerie at that moment. What Qingqing said is right. The spirit of Buddhism is not founded on cultivation. Even though all of you cultivate the powers of Buddhism, you're not worthy of being called Buddhas, commented Yi Futian calmly. His body glowed radiantly as he was surrounded by divine light. Pressure similarly emanated from his body to fight against the domineering light of Buddha. It is currently all Buddha's fest. We still need to wait a few days more before we can engage in fights, Tongchan Arhat said with a smile. His interruption caused the tension between the two powers to come to a halt. Buddha is merciful. If today weren't all Buddha's fest, I would have purged all of your souls here in Western Heaven. That would have prevented you from continuing to be a scourge to all, said a cultivator who was a disciple of Shenyang Buddha Lord. Golden beams shot out from his eyes as he stared at Yi Futian and his group. The light of Buddha emitted by this cultivator was piercing. Is that so? Chen Yi cast a glance at the other party and unleashed the power of light. Light beams emitted from Chen Yi's eyes as he glared at the other party and said, "If it weren't all Buddha's fest today, you would most likely only be able to purge yourself even after you borrow the power of your seniors." The cultivation of these newly arrived cultivators was ordinary. Even the strongest were merely at the peak of the Renhuang Plain. Chen Yi was not afraid of them at all. It was only wishful thinking for them to want to kill Yi Futian's group with their cultivation level. "Everyone, don't forget about the ordeal in 6 Desires Heaven and Saint Xunchan," Tongchan Arhat spoke again. He seemed to be motivated by a desire to see the world in chaos. Back then, quite a few Lord-level figures had perished in the fight in 6 Desires Heaven. Saint Xunchan was a top figure among the cultivators from the Buddhist sects, yet he had also died in that commotion. Right now, even though Yi Futian had lost the divine body of Shunjia the Great Emperor, his own combat ability was surely very powerful as well. If the two parties were to engage in a fight, it was still uncertain as to whose souls would be purged. Chapter 2469, The Great Buddha. Several Buddhist cultivators under the tutelage of Shenyang Buddha Lord now stepped forward, their eyes radiating the frightening light of Buddha, aimed toward Yi Futian and the others. Yi Futian frowned. These people really wanted to start something. Under the examination of Buddha's clairvoyance, Fang Kun and the others felt extreme discomfort. Since they had no way to resist, it was as if everything of theirs were being exposed. Furthermore, surreal images appeared behind them. It was a vision enabled by the Great Path superpowers. Of course, even more cultivators fixed their attention on Yi Futian. The Buddha's clairvoyance could detect all truths. When cultivated to its extreme, it was rumored that the life and death of all living beings could be seen. The detection of cultivation method was but only a small trick this superpower was capable of. It was one of the many uses of Buddha's clairvoyance. However, at the moment, Yi Futian's entire body dazzled with divine light. It was as if there was a protective layer of light about him, which even the Buddha's clairvoyance was unable to invade. Under the surveillance of those heavenly eyes, nothing substantial could be seen. They could only see Yi Futian standing there quietly, surrounded by divine light. He was tremendous and imposing as he stood there. The sense of transcendence was palpable. Watching the sight before them, many sneered coldly inside. It seemed that Yi Futian was indeed exceptional. The Buddha's clairvoyance was of absolutely no use against him. Yi Futian was like an enigma that couldn't be understood or captured. Yi Futian continued standing there quietly, his eyes frosty cold. His eyes were ever-changing as he looked toward those Buddhist cultivators who were looking back at him. This one look seemed to bring those cultivators into another world, another space. "I come from the divine prefecture in or of Buddhism, observing the commandments of all Buddha's fest, but what are you all doing?" Yi Futian chided them, and his voice reverberated through the void. The hearts of those Buddhist cultivators shuddered. Many of them experienced a prickly pain in their third eye. Not only did they fail to see through Yi Futian, but also they were affected by him. The cultivators in the far distance were a little shocked when they beheld this scene. This Yi Futian was truly remarkable. However, at this time, above the void, there were 2 figures surrounded by the blazing light of Buddha. Many monks would bow to salute these 2 whenever they encountered them. One of them was an old monk, while the other was quite young. They were both under the tutelage of Shenyang Buddha Lord. The old monk was a cultivator who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path, while the young man was the first disciple under Shenyang Buddha Lord, known as Shenyang Arhat. The 2 of them looked at Yi Futian at the same time, and a pair of elusive eyes appeared in the void. They were somewhat similar to the Buddha's clairvoyance, which was used previously by Zhu Hu. However, their prowess was not comparable, not even close. Under the scrutiny of Buddha's clairvoyance, Yi Futian felt that even with the power of the Great Path protecting around him, he was completely transparent. It was like nothing could be hidden from the other's prying gaze. He even wondered whether it was a mistake in coming to the sacred land of Western Heaven. The abilities of these Buddhist cultivators were completely different from those practiced in the divine prefecture. These abilities could see into too many secret things. As the old monk unleashed the Buddha's clairvoyance, his eyes grew unsteady. It was as the images he was perceiving frightened him a little. What he saw was not Yi Futian, who was surrounded simply by the divine light of the great path, but a massive towering figure that resembled a deity. This figure was a little fuzzy to him, even at his advanced cultivation level, he was unable to discern it completely. He knew that his realm was not high enough, and his Buddha's clairvoyance was far from reaching the ultimate peak form. But there was no doubt in his mind that the images he saw were a foreshadowing of sorts. At least, Yi Futian would be a super powerful existence in the future, which accounted for the vision that had appeared before them. You came from the divine prefecture and stirred up a storm in 6 Desires Heaven. You slaughtered our cultivators of Buddhism. Now you show up here on the sacred land of the Western Heaven. What is your intention? The old monk interrogated him with a voice as great as a bell ringing. Each other word shook Yi Futian to his core. Yi Futian felt his heart palpitate as his breathing became unsteady. Suddenly, he could clearly sense that the other's eyes seemed to pry into something more. Something invisible and untraceable moved. The stronger he was, the harder it was to detect his cultivation. I heard that the sacred land of the Western Heaven is the holy land of Buddhism, but the visit today was rather disappointing. As for why I am here, is there any reason why I'm not allowed on the sacred land of the Western Heaven? Yi Futian retorted as he raised his eyes to look at the other. His stance and aura were not any lesser, even when he repudiated a cultivator who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. After all, before this moment, he had killed many cultivators who had survived the divine tribulation of the Great Path. The sacred land of Western Heaven is the holy land of Buddhism. Naturally, people are allowed to come and seek Buddha's enlightenment. However, it is inappropriate for you to come to the holy land of Buddhism after you have slaughtered disciples of Buddhism. A powerful Buddhist cultivator in the distant void now spoke up. It seemed that many people were aggrieved with Yi Futian in this sacred land of Western Heaven. Since Yi Futian stepped into the Western world of Buddhism, everything he did had angered many people. Every one of those Lord-level figures that had died at his hands was considered a powerful force in the world of Buddhism. But because of someone like him who came from the divine prefecture, each of them had met their unfortunate death, which curtailed the power in the Buddhist world considerably. More importantly, Lord Initial Zen and Saint Xunchan themselves were Buddhists, cultivators belonging to the orthodoxy of Buddhism. Why would I slaughter disciples of Buddhism? Yi Futian retorted. He understood the displeasure these people had toward him. However, ever since he entered the Western world of Buddhism, he had been trapped in situations he had not created. It could be said that he could not find a peaceful moment. Under those circumstances, he had no choice but to struggle and resist. Hence, leading up to everything he encountered afterward. Humph! Cold disdain sounded in unison, as these Buddhists still seemed unwilling to let bygones be bygones. But at this moment, above the sky in the distance, a peaceful and benevolent light of Buddha flooded the sky, and a voice spoke. Amitabha. The sound of Buddha lingered, resounding through heaven and earth. A towering and sacred Buddha statue appeared on the distant horizon, cast with gold. However, this golden Buddha statue was on the move. It was as if it were not a statue but a real person. When they saw the appearance of this Buddha statue, numerous Buddhists who were present immediately bowed down to pay their respect, including countless cultivators from the sacred land of the Western Heaven. All of them clasped their hand in front of them to worship him. Many recognized this statue, as it was a Buddha commonly enshrined and worshipped by many in the sacred land of the Western Heaven. Buddha Lord. Greetings to the Buddha Lord. All these voices echoed one after the other, and those cultivators under the tutelage of the great Buddha were paying their respects with humility. The cultivators from Western Heaven were even more emotional. They were witnessing the manifestation of the Buddha Lord right in front of their eyes. Yi Futian's gaze also fixed in that direction. The golden Buddha statue was shining with infinite light of Buddha, sheltering all of the Western Heaven. He appeared quite advanced in age. He was clearly a great Buddha who had cultivated for numerous years. Which Buddha Lord is this now? Yi Futian thought. Several Buddha Lords in the Western world of Buddhism were revered and worshipped by the world. The Buddha Lord that appeared now was probably not the Lord of all Buddhas. Benefactor, ye came all the way from the divine prefecture, and this is hardly our way of receiving guests. All Buddhas Fest is a major event in our world of Buddhism, so stop making more troubles for our guests. This voice resounded through the void. When all these Buddhist cultivators heard these words, they knew they could not do anything to Yi Futian anymore. They all bowed down deeply to that Buddha Lord. Yi Futian. That Buddha Lord looked at Yi Futian. At this moment, Yi Futian felt so comfortable bathing in the light of Buddha. He bowed to the Buddha Lord and said, Yi Futian greets the Buddha Lord. No need for formalities. The Buddha Lord said, you came from the divine prefecture to the western heaven. What's your business? Yes. Yi Futian nodded and said, I would like to ask for an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas. Everyone was astounded when they heard Yi Futian's request. An audience with the Lord of all Buddhas? They never thought that Yi Futian would be thinking of doing that. It was no easy task for top Buddhist figures to gain an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas. Amitabha. The Buddha Lord looked at Yi Futian and said, it all depends on your own fortune. Having said that, the Buddha statue disappeared. It was as if it had never been there in the first place. After he disappeared, Yi Futian looked in that direction and appeared thoughtful. It seemed that not everyone in Buddhism was like the cultivators currently in front of him. This Buddha Lord, for example, was tremendously gracious and forgiving when there was no need for him to be. Since he had manifested and made an appearance, it was obviously not some disingenuous overture. Which Buddha Lord is this? Yi Futian asked. Everyone around him should have known him. Just him, a cultivator from the divine prefecture, did not. Wutian Buddha Lord, someone said. With a turning of his mind, there was no place that Wutian Buddha Lord could not reach. He was one of the supreme existences in the Buddhist sect, cultivating celerity, also known as teletransportation. Any destination could be reached as quickly as a passing thought. Chapter 2470, Grandmaster Yumu. After Wutian Buddha Lord vanished, the expressions of those who were giving Yi Futian a hard time before turned to great displeasure. However, they did not dare to say anything that challenged the command of the Buddha Lord. They could only look at Yi Futian with disdain and said, you have slaughtered our cultivators, but now you are asking for an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas. That's crazy man's talk. The Lord of all Buddhas had long transcended the world, no longer bound by the 5 elements of the earth. He was not someone who would receive visitors lightly, not even those Buddha Lords could ask for an audience whenever they liked. Now, all Buddhas Fest did pose an opportunity. But they would not agree to Yi Futian asking for an audience with the Lord of all Buddhas. Many of them looked at Yi Futian with a cold and indifferent expression. Even if there were a chance for Yi Futian to meet the Lord of all Buddhas, with them around, they would make sure that never happened. You are lucky that Wutian Buddha Lord made a personal appearance, someone commented coldly. Although they did not dare to make further trouble for Yi Futian, they still seemed quite angry. To them, it was as if Wutian Buddha Lord's words could not change their minds. This piqued Yi Futian's curiosity. What was the status of Wutian Buddha Lord in the world of Buddhism? Benefactor Yi, we will see each other again if it is meant to be, Tongchan Arhat said to Yi Futian with a smile. Suddenly, alertness was shown in Yi Futian's eyes. Again, he felt being spied upon and knew that the thoughts he had previously may have been detected by the other. This superpower of telepathy was so incredible that it was easily forgotten by those around it. However, what he was thinking was nothing of great importance, so it didn't really matter. Tongchan Arhat turned to leave. The rest of the cultivators regarded Yi Futian with indifference. There were still many of them who were hostile towards him. At this time, a Buddhist cultivator suddenly appeared next to Yi Futian, invisible and soundless. He seemed to have emerged out of thin air. There was no warning prior to his appearance, which greatly alarmed Yi Futian. What a strange and uncanny superpower. Buddha's celerity, Yi Futian secretly remarked to himself, remembering one of the 6 superpowers of Buddhism. Buddha's celerity seemed to be an ultimate application of spatial methods and somewhat superior to the great path of space. Its ability to travel freely anywhere without restriction was formidable. With Buddha's celerity, one could easily escape being chased by someone else of a higher realm. When used in tracking others, its success was even more spectacular. Futian Buddha Lord was a Buddha Lord who specialized in Buddha's celerity. It seemed that this Buddhist cultivator who had just appeared cultivated the same skill as Futian Buddha Lord. Futian assessed the other man and saw that the man had half of a kasaya hanging on the top half of his body, leaving one of his arms exposed. He looked to be in his mid-30s, simple and honest. He looked as if he was some kind of ascetic cultivator. "Little monk, I am pleased to make your acquaintance, benefactor Yi." The monk bowed to Futian with his hands clasped in front of him. He appeared extremely courteous. Futian returned his gesture and said, "Futian greets the Grandmaster. How is the Grandmaster to be addressed?" "Little monk, I am called Yumu," the monk replied. A strange look flashed across Futian's eyes. The name Yumu also implied that great wisdom often lay in what appeared to be foolishness. "Greetings, Grandmaster Yumu." Futian saluted him once again. He was very grateful that Futian Buddha Lord had recently saved him from a tough situation. This Grandmaster Yumu looked to be a cultivator under the tutelage of Futian Buddha Lord, so Futian was already partial to him, especially since he had been treated so rudely by so many Buddhist cultivators just now. "Benefactor Yi is overly kind." Grandmaster Yumu said, "Little monk, I came here mainly to assist Benefactor Yi in your questions. You are new to the sacred land of Western Heaven. If you have any questions, you can ask me." This Grandmaster Yumu had extraordinary cultivation, yet he consistently referred to himself as Little Monk. Moreover, he was invisible and soundless when he came. Futian barely perceived the slightest aura before his arrival. If this Grandmaster Yumu had chosen to attack him, he would be in an unimaginable bind. There were also several others, such as Tongchan Arhat, who were exceptional cultivators themselves. These people may be the top Buddhist enchanting geniuses of their generation, and the methods of Buddhism they cultivated were unusual and peculiar. Even someone like Futian was full of respect and in awe. He dared not underestimate these top figures. Therefore, even though Yumu referred to himself as Little Monk, Futian was not so stupid as to follow suit. He merely said, "If that's the case, then many thanks to Grandmaster Yumu. Please." Yumu extended his hand and gestured. But Futian responded, "Grandmaster Yumu, you first." Yumu nodded slightly, then turned to go. He deliberately slowed down to wait for Futian and only moved forward when Futian had caught up to him. When many cultivators saw them leaving, their expressions were still one of cold apathy. However, with intervention from Futian Buddha Lord, there was not much they could do now but to drop the matter entirely. Therefore, each of them dispersed. Soon, everyone left and disappeared without a trace. Futian and his party walked above the sacred land of Western Heaven with Yumu. Futian said, "Grandmaster Yumu, I was watching those cultivators from before, and they seemed somewhat to disapprove of the Grandmaster. In fact, he had something else he didn't say." Although the words of Futian Buddha Lord had stopped the advancement of these foes, it did not seem to be a strong enough deterrent. At least, some of those people were still reluctant and continued to threaten Futian verbally. It was not hard to judge their overall attitude. Yumu nodded and said, "Benefactor Yi came from the Divine Prefecture, so you know that these same situations exist in every realm. The Divine Prefecture has 18 domains and 18 domain chiefs' manors. Even the Great Emperor's direct principality is under the control of someone different. How could they be expected to be of one single mind?" From Yumu's reply, Futian knew that he thoroughly understood the meaning behind his comment. Indeed, no matter which principality, there were inherently different factions, and it was impossible to be of one mind. When he first arrived in the world of Buddhism, he thought that the world of Buddhism was one united body, which, in retrospect, was somewhat a naive notion. Under the Lord of all Buddhas, there are many great Buddhas, and different Buddhas have different cultivational concepts. Under the Lord of all Buddhas, there are Buddhas who guard the world of Buddhism, enforce the laws of the Western world, and take charge of all matters in the world of Buddhism. The head of this branch is Tongchan Buddha Lord. Zhenchan Temple, which Benefactor Yi was in a prior altercation with, and Lord Initial Zen, who perished, all belong to this branch, Yumu explained. When Yi Futian heard this explanation, he immediately understood why Tongchan Arhat appeared so unfriendly. It seemed that Buddhist cultivators in this branch all borne the meaning of Zen in their name somewhere. In addition, there are also preaching Buddhas. This kind of Buddhist cultivation is responsible for the preaching of Buddhist teachings in the world of Buddhist. My master, Wutian Buddha Lord, belongs to this branch. There are also Buddhist cultivators who observe those cultivators in the world of Buddhism and listen to the voices within it. Finally, there are also Buddhas of penance who are devoted to Buddhism and care not for earthly affairs. Yi Futian nodded slightly when he heard the explanation from the man. He now had a rough understanding of the order of things and people. Thank you, Grandmaster, for your detailed explanation, he said. There is one other thing that I am quite curious about. It was said that hundreds of years ago, Donghuang the Great came here to seek Buddhist instruction, taught by the Lord of all Buddhas himself. Previously, I have also heard that Donghuang the Great had cultivated one of the 6 superpowers of Buddhism. Do you know which superpower he cultivated in? Asked Yi Futian. Was Tianyin Arhat the one who told this to you, Benefactor Yi? Yumu asked. He was. Yi Futian nodded. Previously, Tianyin Arhat found him and told him about it, but he didn't specify which superpower was cultivated by Donghuang the Great. I'm afraid Benefactor Yi was deceived by Tianyin Arhat, Yumu replied. Tianyin Arhat lied. Yi Futian found that a little strange. So, Donghuang the Great never came here to cultivate Buddhism, and the rumors we heard from the outside were false? Yi Futian was a little confused. Yumu shook his head. Of course, it is true. Donghuang the Great did come here to seek Buddhism teachings. However, Tianyin Arhat didn't know which was cultivated by Donghuang the Great. As far as I know, only the Lord of all Buddhas and Donghuang the Great himself know of this between them. Everything else you heard on the outside was totally hearsay. Not only Tianyin Arhat didn't know, but even Tianyin Buddha Lord himself does not necessarily know anything more about it. I see, Yi Futian nodded. Tianyin Arhat had told him that the Buddha had not said even a word. Perhaps even he did not know much more than the basics. However, that Tianyin Arhat was a funny character. At least he didn't mean Yi Futian any harm. When Tongchan Arhat appeared before, he had made sure to remind Yi Futian to be careful of the other man. Yumu, you are not me. How do you know that I don't know? Just as the two of them were speaking, a voice suddenly rang through their ears. This completely caught Yi Futian by surprise. He looked up into the distance and wondered, was he eavesdropping on them? This Buddha's clairaudience was indeed magical. He had been completely unaware of it. And you're not me, so how do you know that I don't know that you don't know? Yumu replied calmly. He didn't seem to take offense when he responded readily across the way. Yi Futian smiled when he heard the conversation between those two. I can't win with you. Of course you are right, Tianyin Arhat responded, and Yi Futian was a little surprised by his reply. It seemed that Yumu's combat effectiveness was more than met the eye. When he met Tianyin Arhat before, he had a feeling that the other was exceedingly exceptional. Now, Tianyin Arhat claimed he was unable to best Yumu, indicating a noticeable gap in their combat effectiveness. However, Wutian Buddha Lord preached Buddhist teachings, and Yumu was the heir of Wutian Buddha Lord. It went without saying that he must be proficient in Buddhist teachings and methods, and his combat effectiveness was understandably powerful. I have one final question. If I want to see the Lord of all Buddhas, does Grandmaster Yumu have a way in? Yi Futian asked. Yumu was silent for a moment, and Tianyin Arhat, who was in the distance, did not speak either. Right after that, Yumu commented, it's probably a little hard, especially since you have already offended a lot of people among the Buddhist sects. Indeed, there is probably only one chance to meet the Lord of all Buddhas. All Buddhas Conference of Western Heaven will be held in the last month of All Buddhas Fest, at which time, all the Buddhas of Western Heaven will be there to discuss the Buddhist teachings and methods until the end of the fest. Since this would be the 10,000th year of the All Buddhas calendar, the Lord of all Buddhas will likely make an appearance this time around. However, this conference is strictly a meeting for all the Buddhas in Buddhism to exchange their methods and teachings, and all the major Buddhas will be present. If you attend, you will most certainly stick out like a sore thumb. Furthermore, you have offended many Buddhist cultivators. I don't think you will even be allowed entry there, Yumu continued. All Buddhas conference, Yi Futian murmured. All the great Buddhas of Western Heaven would gather in one place, and indeed, it might be difficult for him to get in. How did Donghuang the Great get to meet the Lord of all Buddhas back then? Yi Futian asked suddenly. When Yumu thought about that, he couldn't help but show a solemn look on his face. It was as if he was still awed by the memories of it all these years later. He said, Donghuang the Great went to all Buddhas' conference to discuss the teachings of Buddhism and outshone all of the Buddhas. These Buddhist scriptures are copied by major ancient temples, so that anyone who comes to the sacred land of Western Heaven to cultivate may have access to them. Of course, those who could come to the sacred land of Western Heaven were themselves extraordinary figures already. They were cultivators of advanced and profound realms. These people were all figures in the top echelon of the Western world, and it was very significant for these people to preach Buddhism to them. Furthermore, besides the secret methods of Buddhism and other rare superpowers, most of the scriptures of Buddhism can be found in the ancient temples of Western Heaven. Yumu continued, Benefactor Yi meant to follow in the steps of Donghuang the Great, comprehend Buddhist methods, and use them to participate in the All Buddhas Conference, to compete with other Buddhas? Does the Grandmaster think it possible? Yi Futian did not deny that at the moment, this seemed to be the only route he could take. It is hard. Yumu's eyes appeared thoughtful. He said, Little monk, I know that Benefactor Yi is talented above all others, but time is pressing. Benefactor Yi has never been in contact with Buddhist methods before, and it is only dozens of days away from the All Buddhas Conference. If Benefactor Yi meant to comprehend Buddhism in order to compete in discussion with other Buddhas, it will not be an easy task. And that is putting it mildly. Donghuang the Great had done it once. But, how many Donghuang the Greats were out there in this world? For thousands of years, there had been no one who could be compared with Donghuang the Great. Several other great emperors were all mighty existences before the time of Donghuang the Great. No matter how difficult it might be, it doesn't hurt to try, said Yi Futian. Yumu nodded and said, Benefactor Yi is right on that front, of course. Hundreds of years ago, Donghuang the Great defeated all the Buddhas by the method of Buddhism. Today, layman Yi, who also came from the divine prefecture, would like to repeat history. For this, little monk, I am very curious to see. In the days that follow, I would make sure no one will disturb Benefactor Yi's cultivation in Buddhism. Tianyin Arhat's voice came from the distance as he continued, Yumu, guard Benefactor Yi well, and don't let anyone disturb his cultivation. Yumu pondered for a moment, then nodded. Very well. I wouldn't dare trouble the Grandmaster to such extent. Yi Futian said, The Buddha Lord has already come forward to intervene on my behalf once in person. I'm sure no one will come and make trouble. All Buddha's conference is coming soon. I'm sure the Grandmaster must have a lot of things to do before that. Please don't trouble yourselves on my account. Yumu was a disciple of Wutian Buddha Lord, so his title ought to be somewhere close to an arhat. Even though he had been more than polite and humble in Yi Futian's presence, he was undoubtedly a great Buddha himself, with lofty status in the Buddhist sect. To trouble others for his own protection was not something Yi Futian felt he was entitled to, nor did he wish to bother the others unnecessarily. It's no trouble. I am taking this opportunity to review some of the Buddhist methods. For, little monk, this is also cultivation, Yumu replied. If the Grandmaster insists, I will have no mind to concentrate on my studying of Buddhism. Even if the other man had expressed his willingness, in good conscience, Yi Futian couldn't very well delay others in what they had to do. Seeing that Yi Futian was persistent on this point, Yumu didn't force the issue. Instead, he said, since Benefactor Yi said so, little monk will not disturb Benefactor Yi's study of Buddhism. However, if there are unforeseen incidents taking place here, little monk will come and handle them. Right now, when all Buddha's fest is happening, there should be no one in all of the sacred land of the Western Heaven will disturb Benefactor Yi. Yi Futian nodded and bowed to Yumu with his hands clasped. Thank you, Grandmaster. Likewise, Yumu put his hands together and replied, Then, little monk will take my leave now. Safe travel, Grandmaster, Yi Futian responded and saw Yumu stepping forward. However, after just a few steps, the other man's figure disappeared without a trace. It was as if he had never been there before. Even Yi Futian could feel a fluctuation of power originated from the great path of space. Yi Futian was quite amazed by what he saw. Was this Buddha's celerity? Indeed, the 6 superpowers of Buddhism were endlessly wondrous. After Yumu left, Chen Yi asked Yi Futian, Do you really mean to cultivate in Buddhist methods? Is there a problem with that? Yi Futian asked Chen Yi instead. Chen Yi shook his head. It's just that with only a few dozen days left, will that be enough time? The methods of Buddhism may be different from all the methods they had cultivated before. The more advanced the Buddhist methods, the more difficult it was to cultivate. For Yi Futian to cultivate these methods in a limited period of time was something short of a tall order, with high levels of difficulties, as he had to compete with other Buddhas using Buddhist methods. Never mind that those figures of Buddhas or Arhats were enchanting genius talents themselves, even those many disciples of Buddhism were impressive and striking figures. It was equivalent to the top geniuses in divine prefecture all gathering together in one place. The great paths are connected, and I am not so slow in my cultivation, Yi Futian responded. However, he saw that Chen Yi didn't quite believe it. Of course, even Yi Futian himself knew just how complicated this matter was. After all, he would be facing the topmost group of people in all of the Western world of Buddhism. However, the road that Donghuang the Great had walked once, he must now travel on it as well, no matter what. When you cultivate Buddhist methods, I can be by your side. Perhaps it will be of some help to you, Hua Qingqing said, which surprised Chen Yi to no end. Was this possible? Chen Yi stole a glance at Hua Jiyu, whose expression did not change one bit. At this time, Chen Yi couldn't help but admire Yi Futian's ability. Very well. Yi Futian nodded, and the admiration in Chen Yi's eyes turned into worship. Yi Futian had no idea of the thoughts that went through Chen Yi's mind. Hua Qingqing's words didn't mean anything else. Only Yi Futian knew how special she was. This was the reason why they came to the sacred land of Western Heaven in the first place. Let's go, Yi Futian said as he started moving forward. I'll pick a place, Hua Qingqing said. Yi Futian looked at her and agreed, good. With that said, Hua Qingqing went first, and everyone else followed behind her. It didn't take long for the group of them to come to an ordinary temple. Very few people entered, but Hua Qingqing stepped right into it. Yi Futian accompanied her. After entering the temple, they found its library. In the library, there were rows upon rows of bookshelves on which were all the scriptures cast in jade slips. The bookshelves were engraved with words, clearly denoting their categories. Hua Qingqing took out a volume from a specific place on the shelf and handed it to Yi Futian. Yi Futian took the scripture and looked at it. This sutra was none other than one of the Buddhist basics, the Heart Sutra. Not only that, but the scriptures here all seemed to be basic Buddhist scriptures, not some high-level cultivational method, nor had they seen any scriptures about powerful Buddhist superpowers. However, Hua Qingqing brought him here first and handed him a volume of Heart Sutra. Yi Futian knew that Hua Qingqing had some prior exposure to Buddhism, although that was when she was in the lower worlds. If you can thoroughly understand the important scriptures here, then when you cultivate methods of Buddhism, you will get twice the result with half the effort, Hua Qingqing said to Yi Futian, and Yi Futian agreed. As his divine consciousness pried into the scriptures, all of a sudden, the words floated in his mind. They were the content of the scriptures. At the same time, Hua Qingqing, who was beside him, closed her eyes, and there was a mysterious force gushing out of her. Her soft lips seemed to be moving. A strange sound of Buddha seeped into Yi Futian's ears, and instantly Yi Futian entered into a state of selflessness. At that moment, it was like he had entered the heart of Buddhism, which was an amazing feeling. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,